There are moments in history that feel incomplete, not because we lack records, not because evidence was destroyed, but because something does not fit. A detail remains out of place, a signal appears once, then never again. A village stands, then vanishes. A ship drifts, perfectly intact, without a single soul aboard. We tell ourselves that the modern world has explanations for everything, that science has mapped the unknown, that satellites circle the planet, recording every movement, that algorithms analyze every pattern, and yet some mysteries refuse to close, some questions linger at the edge of certainty, and the deeper we look, the less stable the answers become. Tonight we step into those questions, not the loud mysteries, not the exaggerated headlines, but the quiet ones, the kind that unfold slowly, the kind that resist easy explanation, the kind that sit patiently in archives, in deserts, in oceans, and in the sky, waiting, because history is not just a collection of facts, it is a landscape of missing pieces. And when you begin to follow the threads, you discover that some rabbit holes do not end. They widen, they deepen. Fulfilled to view in the progress, about knowledge, about sneeing and swinning. Across continents and centuries, there are events that remain suspended between explanation and uncertainty. A mountain slope in Russia where experienced hikers fled into frozen darkness, and one body was found with her tongue missing. A forest in Siberia flattened in perfect radial symmetry by something that exploded in the sky, leaving no crater behind. An ancient mechanism pulled from the sea, filled with gears no one believed could exist in its era. A manuscript written in a language no one can read. A signal from deep space that lasted 72 seconds and then fell silent forever. None of these stories scream for attention. They do not demand belief. They do not require the supernatural, but they endure. And endurance is its own form of mystery, because in a world that explains most things quickly, these did not disappear, they stayed, unresolved. And perhaps that is what unsettles us most. Not the possibility of monsters or aliens or lost civilizations, but the possibility that even with modern tools, we still do not understand everything. Tonight, we travel across deserts carved with giant symbols only visible from the sky. We walk through fields of standing stones older than the pyramids. We open a medieval book that refuses translation. We stand on the deck of a ship found adrift with no crew. We listen to a sound that only some people can hear, and we look toward the stars, where one brief signal may have been something more. Each mystery stands alone. Each event occurred in a different time, in a different place, under different conditions, and yet they share something. They share absence of explanation, absence of closure, absence of certainty. But as we move deeper into these stories, something else begins to appear, a pattern, not of conspiracy, not of hidden control, but of limitation, the limitation of perspective, of record-keeping, of memory, of interpretation. Because sometimes, what we call mystery is simply the edge of our understanding, and sometimes it is something more. So take a moment. Imagine standing in silence, a cold mountain wind pressing against you, or a desert stretching outward with no horizon, or the deck of a ship drifting without direction. Imagine discovering something that does not align with expectation, something small, something subtle, but enough to make you pause. That pause is where we begin, because the most chilling rabbit holes do not begin with chaos. They begin with a detail that should not be there, or a detail that should, but isn't. And once you notice it, you cannot unsee it. Over the next several hours, we will not chase sensational answers. We will not declare hidden truths. We will examine what is known. We will examine what is missing, and we will sit calmly in the space between them. Because the truth about mystery is this: it does not always shout. Sometimes it whispers, and sometimes the whisper is louder than certainty. So dim the lights, settle in, and prepare to question not only what happened, but how much of history we truly understand. Because once you follow these threads, you may begin to notice something unsettling. Not that the world is stranger than we thought, but that it has always been that way, and we are only now paying attention. The Dyatlov Pass Missing Tongue Enigma. What happens when a mystery refuses to fade? High in the northern Ural Mountains, where the wind cuts across frozen ridges and snow erases all footprints within hours, there is a slope that still carries a name spoken with caution: Dyatlov Pass. In February of 1959, 9 experienced hikers set out across this harsh wilderness. They were young, disciplined, and well-trained. Led by Igor Dyatlov, the group had completed difficult winter expeditions before. They understood the cold. They understood the terrain. They did not understand what would happen next. When the hikers failed to return on schedule, a search began. At first, there was little concern. Delays were common in extreme winter conditions, but days passed, then weeks. Eventually, search teams located their abandoned tent on the eastern slope of a mountain known locally as Kolatsiakal, translated ominously as Mountain of the Dead. The tent was partially buried in snow. But what investigators noticed first was not where the tent was. It was how it had been opened. The canvas had been cut from the inside, not torn by wind, not collapsed by snow, cut open deliberately, from within. The hikers had fled into the freezing darkness without proper clothing. Boots were left behind, coats were left behind, supplies untouched. Footprints led away from the tent, barefoot, in socks, into the night, at temperatures approaching -30°C. The first bodies were found beneath a cedar tree nearly a mile from the tent. 2 of the hikers were barefoot, wearing only undergarments. Their hands were burned, as if they had tried to climb the tree or build a fire. Branches above them were broken several meters high, suggesting desperate attempts to gain elevation, perhaps to see something, or escape something. More bodies were found scattered between the cedar tree and the tent. Some appeared to be returning toward shelter when they collapsed. And then the final 4 were discovered weeks later in a ravine, buried under meters of snow. It was here that the mystery deepened. Several of these hikers had suffered massive internal injuries, broken ribs, a fractured skull, trauma compared by investigators to the force of a car crash. Yet there were no external wounds consistent with such violence, no defensive injuries, no signs of a struggle. And among those final 4 was Lyudmila Dubenina. When her body was recovered, one detail stunned investigators. Her tongue was missing, along with parts of her lips and soft facial tissue. There were no clear signs of surgical removal, no documented evidence of animal attack in the official autopsy. The report stated that the soft tissue was absent, but offered no definitive cause, and that absence would become one of the most haunting elements of the entire case. How does a tongue simply disappear? The official Soviet investigation concluded that the hikers died due to a compelling natural force. The case was closed, no criminal activity was confirmed, but the details refused to settle quietly. Let's examine what is known. The hikers were experienced. Panic is not easily triggered in trained mountaineers, yet something drove them to cut their way out of their own tent rather than exit normally. Why? One explanation suggests a slab avalanche, a localized shift of packed snow. Not a towering wall of ice, but a sudden collapse that could crush a tent and force occupants to flee immediately. Modern simulations have shown that small avalanches can create pressures strong enough to cause internal injuries without obvious external damage. But critics argue that the slope was not steep enough to support such an event. Photographs from the scene show limited snow displacement, and footprints remain visible for some distance, suggesting no massive slide had occurred. Another theory involves infrasound, low-frequency vibrations caused by wind interacting with the mountain's shape. Some researchers propose that certain wind patterns could produce frequencies that trigger panic, nausea, or disorientation. Could the hikers have experienced an overwhelming psychological response to something they could not hear consciously? Yet this theory struggles to explain the physical trauma found later. Others point to military testing. The late 1950s were a period of intense Cold War secrecy. Reports surfaced of unusual orange lights seen in the sky during that time. Some hikers' clothing tested positive for low levels of radiation. Was the group caught in an unintended military experiment? Official records have never confirmed such activity in the area, and radiation levels were not high enough to conclusively support this claim. Then there is the environment itself. Extreme cold can produce paradoxical undressing, a phenomenon where hypothermia victims feel sudden burning warmth and remove clothing. It can cause confusion, irrational decisions, and impaired judgment. Could fear, cold, and confusion have spiraled into tragedy? Perhaps, but it does not fully explain the broken ribs without external damage, nor the fractured skull, nor the missing tongue. Some forensic specialists suggest that the tongue may have decomposed naturally. Soft tissue deteriorates faster than bone. Water flow in the ravine where Dubinina's body was found could have accelerated tissue loss. Small scavengers could have removed exposed tissue without leaving dramatic bite marks. Scientifically, this is plausible. Emotionally, it feels insufficient. Because the Dyatlov case is not just about injuries, it is about behavior. 9 capable individuals made decisions that appear irrational, unless something extraordinary occurred. No signs of other human presence were found. No foreign footprints. No weapon fragments. The forest itself offered silence, and that silence has persisted for over 6 decades. Modern reinvestigations have revisited avalanche theory using advanced modeling. Some experts now argue that a delayed slab avalanche could indeed explain the injuries and panic response. Snow shifting hours after camp setup could have forced the hikers to cut through their tent and escape quickly to avoid being buried. But even this explanation requires accepting a sequence of extreme coincidences. The hikers flee without proper gear. They split up. Some attempt to return. Others seek shelter in a ravine. They survive for hours, perhaps longer. Then they succumb. And one body is left with missing soft tissue that captures the public imagination more than any other detail. The tongue. It is a small anatomical detail, yet symbolically powerful. A voice silenced. A question without answer. In truth, the Dyatlov past mystery persists because it exists at the intersection of science and uncertainty. Every explanation accounts for part of the puzzle. None account for all of it. The mountain remains. The wind still moves across Kholat Syakhl. Snow still erases tracks. And if you stand there today, in winter, with visibility reduced to white and silence pressing against your ears, it is not difficult to imagine how fragile human certainty becomes. What happened that night? Was it a rare natural event misunderstood by early investigators, a chain reaction of environmental forces amplified by human panic, or a combination of factors so unusual that they appear almost supernatural in hindsight? History offers fragments. Photographs taken by the hikers before their deaths show smiles, camaraderie, ordinary human joy. Nothing suggests they sensed impending disaster. And perhaps that is the most unsettling part. Mysteries often feel distant, ancient, buried in myth. Dyatlov Pass is modern, documented, photographed, forensically examined, yet unresolved. It reminds us that even in the 20th century, an era of technology, record-keeping, and structured investigation, events can occur that resist clean explanation. 9 people entered the mountains, 9 did not return. And on a frozen slope where the snow continues to fall, one detail lingers longer than the rest. A tongue that vanished, a silence that endures, and a question that refuses to disappear. What truly happened on the Mountain of the Dead, the Tunguska event, the forest that fell in perfect circles on the morning of June 30th, 1908, the sky above central Siberia tore open. There were no cameras, no satellites, no seismic monitoring networks stretching across continents. Only forest, endless forest, and the people who lived quietly beneath its horizon. Near the remote Tunguska River, witnesses described a fireball blazing across the sky, brighter than the sun. It moved fast, too fast. Some said it split the air with a roar like artillery. Others claimed the ground trembled before the shockwave arrived. Then came the blast. Windows shattered hundreds of kilometers away. People were knocked off their feet. Reindeer herds collapsed. The sky glowed at night for days afterward, as if lit from beneath the horizon. But when scientists eventually reached the site years later, they found something stranger than simple destruction. They found geometry. Over 2,000 square kilometers of forest had been flattened, yet not randomly. The trees lay outward in a near-perfect radial pattern, like spokes extending from an invisible center, and at that center, no crater. That absence would define the mystery. When the first scientific expedition led by Leonid Kulik reached the area in 1927, nearly 2 decades after the explosion, they expected to find a massive impact site, a deep scar in the earth, melted rock, fragments of a meteorite. Instead, they found trees still standing upright in the central zone, stripped of branches, charred, but vertical, as if a giant hand had pressed down and then released. Surrounding them, the forest lay flattened outward in symmetrical lines. It was not chaos, it was patterned devastation. So what happened? The most widely accepted explanation today is that a meteoroid or comet fragment entered Earth's atmosphere and exploded mid-air in what scientists call an airburst. Rather than striking the ground, the object disintegrated at an altitude of perhaps 5 to 10 kilometers, releasing energy equivalent to 10 to 15 megatons of TNT. That is roughly 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The downward pressure wave would have flattened trees radially. The heat would have scorched branches. The shock wave would have traveled across continents. This explanation accounts for the scale, it accounts for the lack of crater, but it does not resolve every anomaly, because the radial pattern of fallen trees is unusually precise. A conventional explosion typically produces irregular damage depending on terrain, vegetation density, and atmospheric conditions. At Tunguska, many trees appear to have fallen almost uniformly outward aligned in directional spokes. Why so symmetrical? Computer simulations suggest that a mid-air explosion could produce such a pattern if the object approached at a specific angle and velocity. But early researchers struggled to replicate the exact geometry seen on the ground. Another detail complicates the picture. Witnesses reported 2 distinct shock waves. Some described a flash, then a delay, then the sound. Others recalled multiple detonations. Could the object have fragmented before exploding, or was there something else interacting with the atmosphere? Chemical analysis of soil samples revealed elevated levels of certain isotopes consistent with extraterrestrial material. Microscopic silicate spherules were discovered embedded in tree resin, tiny glassy particles that may have formed during extreme heating. This supports the meteoroid theory. Yet no large fragments have ever been conclusively recovered. No definitive core sample. No chunk of space rock bearing the mark of impact. It is as if the object vaporized completely. Some researchers propose that the object was composed primarily of ice, perhaps a fragment of a comet. This would explain the lack of residual debris. Ice would disintegrate almost entirely in an airburst, but others point to the energy release. The explosion appears to have been extraordinarily powerful for a small object. And then there is the matter of radiation. Early Soviet investigations noted unusual growth patterns in surviving trees, accelerated regeneration compared to surrounding regions. Some speculated about residual radiation. However, later analysis suggests that increased sunlight exposure after the forest was flattened may have stimulated rapid growth. Still, reports of animals exhibiting unusual behavior after the blast persist in local accounts. Eyewitness testimony from the indigenous Evenki people adds texture to the mystery. They spoke of the sky splitting, of fire descending, of the forest falling in silence after thunder. Some described feeling intense heat even miles away. Others believed a god had descended in anger. And yet no direct eyewitness stood at ground zero. No one saw the object strike because it did not strike, it exploded above. And that absence of impact complicates understanding. The Tunguska event was not observed by modern instruments. It occurred before global seismic networks were standardized. Its true altitude and trajectory remain estimates. Later comparisons were made to the Chelyabinsk meteor, which exploded over Russia in 2013. That airburst shattered windows and injured over 1,000 people, yet it was far smaller than Tunguska. Chelyabinsk provided modern data that helped model Tunguska retrospectively. But even with modern physics, Tunguska retains a strange elegance, because the damage was immense, but contained. Had the object exploded over a major city, the consequences would have been catastrophic. Instead, it detonated above one of the most sparsely populated regions on Earth. Why there? It is a meaningless question scientifically. Space debris does not choose its landing site, and yet the randomness feels almost deliberate in hindsight. The forest absorbed the blast. Trees became record keepers. Their rings show growth anomalies beginning in 1908. Their fallen trunks preserve the direction of force. The land became an archive, and that archive reveals a nearly perfect circular scar etched into Siberia's taiga. Some fringe theories propose more dramatic explanations. Early speculation included alien spacecraft crashes, experimental weapons, miniature black holes passing through Earth. These theories gained traction primarily because of the lack of crater in the precise radial tree pattern, but none are supported by empirical evidence. Still, they persist. Because Tunguska occupies that liminal space between science and spectacle, it is documented, yet surreal. Verified, yet astonishing. And perhaps that is why it continues to captivate. Because it reminds us how vulnerable the planet is. The Earth moves through space at 67,000 miles per hour, surrounded by debris. Most objects burn harmlessly in the atmosphere. But occasionally, something larger slips through. Something fast, something ancient, and for a fraction of a second, sky becomes fire. The Tunguska forest has largely regrown. From above, it appears normal now, green and dense once more. But beneath that canopy lies a memory written in tree alignment and soil chemistry, a circle, a scar. A moment when cosmic and terrestrial forces intersected violently and then moved on. No crater remains, no monument marks the center, only coordinates, and a question that echoes softly through the trees. Was Tunguska simply a rare cosmic accident, a natural event that happened to occur before we had the tools to study it properly? Or does it reveal that our planet exists in a dynamic system far less predictable than we assume? We often think of space as distant, empty, harmless unless we travel into it. Tunguska reminds us that space occasionally travels into us, unannounced, unavoidable, and sometimes without leaving the kind of evidence we expect. In the quiet of the Siberian forest, wind moves through branches that once lay flat against the ground. The trees that survived now stand older, thicker, silent witnesses to an explosion no human directly saw. A blast that flattened millions of trunks in near-perfect symmetry, a fireball that illuminated the morning sky, and a mystery that remains elegant in its simplicity. Something entered the atmosphere, something exploded, and the forest fell in circles. The Baghdad battery, ancient electricity, or modern misunderstanding. In the dry plains near Baghdad, where layers of civilization rest beneath layers of dust, history is rarely simple. Empires have risen here. Empires have fallen. Sumerians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, each leaving fragments behind. But in 1936, during excavations near Kujut Rabu, just outside modern Baghdad, archaeologists uncovered something small, something ordinary at first glance, and yet something that would ignite decades of debate. The object was a clay jar, roughly 13 centimeters tall. Inside it sat a copper cylinder. Inside that cylinder, an iron rod. The jar was sealed with asphalt, and the combination raised an uncomfortable question. Was this an ancient battery? The artifact is now commonly referred to as the Baghdad battery. Though its original function remains uncertain, the jar dates to the Parthian period, around 250 BCE to 224 CE, long before the formal discovery of electricity in the modern world. When German archaeologist Wilhelm Kronig first examined the object, he noticed something intriguing. The copper cylinder was formed by rolling a sheet of copper and soldering the seam with a lead-tin alloy. The iron rod, suspended inside, showed signs of corrosion. It resembled, in principle, a simple galvanic cell. If the jar had been filled with an acidic liquid, vinegar, grape juice, or lemon juice, it could theoretically produce a small electrical current. Modern experiments replicating the device have demonstrated that it can generate between 0.5 and 1 volt of electricity. That is enough to create mild electric sensation, enough to electroplate small objects with thin layers of metal. And suddenly, history felt less certain. If ancient Mesopotamians possessed rudimentary electrical knowledge, what else did they know? But before leaping to conclusions, context matters. There were no wires found with the jar, no switches, no connectors, no clear evidence of electrical infrastructure. The artifact was discovered among other Parthian-era items, pottery, tools, domestic materials. It did not stand alone as a technological anomaly. So what was it really? Some researchers propose that the jar was used for electroplating, coating silver objects with gold using a weak electrical current. Thin gold plating techniques appear in ancient artifacts across the region. Electroplating requires a current. Could the Baghdad battery have been part of such a process? It is plausible, but there is no direct evidence linking this specific jar to plating workshops. No plating residue found inside. No wires preserved. Others suggested may have been used in religious rituals, perhaps to create small electric shocks for dramatic effect. A priest touching a concealed wire, surprising an initiate. This theory feels imaginative. But again, no textual evidence supports it. Ancient Mesopotamia left extensive written records, trade agreements, astronomical observations, legal codes, yet no document describes electrical experimentation. No tablet references jars producing shocks. No records mention electroplating techniques powered by hidden currents. The silence is telling. Another possibility is far less dramatic. The jar may have been used simply for storage. The copper cylinder might have protected scrolls or papyrus from moisture. The iron rod may have stabilized internal structure. The asphalt seal suggests preservation rather than conduction. In this interpretation, the resemblance to a battery is coincidental. Modern eyes recognize familiar forms where ancient intent may have differed entirely, and this is where the mystery becomes philosophical. Because the Baghdad battery sits at the intersection of projection and possibility. When we look backward through history, we bring our own technological understanding with us. We recognize copper and iron. We understand electrochemical reactions. We imagine ancient engineers experimenting with currents. But did they? Experimental reconstructions demonstrate that the device can produce electricity. That fact alone keeps the debate alive. Yet functionality does not prove intention. A hollow bamboo pole can produce sound if blown into, but that does not make every bamboo stick a flute. The Parthian period was advanced in many ways. Trade networks stretched across continents. Metalworking techniques were refined. Architecture was sophisticated, but there is no widespread evidence of electrical application, no electric-powered tools, no early circuits, no electrical theory preserved in texts. If electricity had been discovered and applied in the ancient world, even in rudimentary form, it seems likely that more traces would exist, unless the knowledge was isolated, experimental, lost. This idea appeals to imagination. The concept of forgotten technologies, civilizations discovering insights only to have them erased by time, resonates deeply. Because history is not linear, libraries burn, empires collapse, knowledge disappears. Could ancient Mesopotamians have stumbled upon electrical phenomena accidentally? Yes. Simple electrochemical reactions occur naturally when metals and acidic solutions combine. A curious artisan might have noticed tingling sensation while handling materials, but noticing a reaction and systematizing it are different. Modern electroplating requires consistent current and chemical understanding. While small-scale plating could be achieved with primitive batteries, scaling it would require intentional design. No workshop remnants clearly demonstrate that level of experimentation, so we return to ambiguity. The Baghdad battery does not prove ancient electricity, but it does not entirely dismiss it either. It exists in that narrow corridor where artifact and imagination overlap. The jar itself is small, unassuming. It does not glow. It does not spark. It sits quietly in museum displays, yet it provokes questions larger than its size. Because if ancient civilizations independently discovered electricity in some form, even accidentally, it would reshape our understanding of technological timelines. Electricity is often framed as a product of the Enlightenment era, of Benjamin Franklin and Alessandro Volta, of 18th and 19th century experimentation. But nature's principles do not wait for formal discovery. They exist whether documented or not. If Parthian artisans discovered that certain material combinations produced sensation or plating effects, they may not have conceptualized it as electricity. They may have simply used it. or abandoned it, or never recognized its broader implications. The absence of written evidence remains the strongest argument against the battery theory. Ancient Mesopotamians were meticulous record keepers. If such technology were valued or understood systematically, some reference might be expected, unless it was niche, secret, experimental, or misunderstood even in its own time. And so the Baghdad battery remains suspended in uncertainty, not extraordinary enough to rewrite textbooks, not ordinary enough to dismiss. It is a reminder that archaeology often uncovers objects without context, fragments separated from intention, materials without manuals. We interpret based on chemistry, based on physics, based on parallels, but ancient thought processes may not align with ours. Standing before the artifact today, one sees a clay jar, a copper tube, an iron rod, nothing dramatic. Yet if filled with vinegar, it hums quietly with measurable current. That silent voltage bridges centuries. Whether accidental or intentional, the possibility lingers. And perhaps that is the true power of the Baghdad battery. Not that it proves ancient electricity, but that it exposes the fragility of our assumptions about progress. We imagine technological history as a steady climb. But what if it includes forgotten plateaus, brief discoveries, abandoned insights, moments of curiosity that flickered and faded? In the end, the Baghdad battery may be exactly what it appears to be, a storage vessel with coincidental electrical properties. Or it may be a relic of experimentation that history failed to preserve fully. The jar does not answer, it simply exists, and in that existence lies a quiet challenge. How much of the ancient world do we truly understand, and how much have we yet to interpret correctly? The Ulfbert swords, steel from the future. In the cold soil of northern Europe, where Viking ships once cut across dark waters and iron rang against shield, archaeologists have uncovered blades that do not seem to belong to their time. They are not ceremonial, they are not oversized, they are weapons, built for war. But hidden along the fuller of several of these medieval swords is a name etched in steel, plus VLF BERH plus T. The inscription appears on roughly 170 swords discovered across Europe, dating between the 9th and 11th centuries. They are now collectively referred to as the Ulfbert swords. At first glance, they resemble typical Viking Age swords, but metallurgical analysis revealed something extraordinary. These blades were made of steel with carbon content far higher than what was thought possible in medieval Europe at that time. And more strikingly, they contain almost no slag. Slag is the glassy byproduct left behind in traditional iron smelting. Medieval European ironworking methods typically left blades brittle and inconsistent. Swords often had to be folded repeatedly to improve strength and reduce impurities. But Ulfbert blades show purity levels that would not be replicated in Europe until centuries later. How? That question has unsettled historians and metallurgists alike. In the early Middle Ages, European smiths relied on bloomery furnaces, low-temperature smelting systems incapable of producing fully liquefied steel. These furnaces could not reach the high temperatures required to remove impurities completely. Yet the steel in genuine Ulfbert swords suggests crucible steel production, a method involving melting iron with carbon in sealed containers at temperatures exceeding 1500 degrees Celsius. Such techniques were known in parts of Central Asia and the Middle East, particularly in regions associated with what is sometimes called Damascus steel. But there is no clear evidence that such advanced steel production existed in Northern Europe during the 9th century. So where did the steel come from? One leading theory suggests long-distance trade. Viking networks stretched farther than commonly imagined. They navigated rivers into Eastern Europe, reached the Byzantine Empire, and established trade routes connecting Scandinavia with the Islamic world. It is possible that raw crucible steel ingots were imported from Central Asia and then forged locally into blades. This would explain the advanced metallurgy. But if so, why do only certain swords bear the plus VLF BERH plus T inscription? Was Ulfbert a mastersmith? A workshop? A monastic brand? The name appears Christian in origin, possibly linked to a Frankish monastery. Some researchers propose that the swords were produced in the Rhineland region, where Carolingian influence was strong. If so, the smith or workshop known as Ulfbert may have gained access to superior imported steel through trade connections, and then branded their blades as marks of quality. But here is where the mystery deepens. Not all Ulfbert swords are equal. Metallurgical analysis reveals two categories: genuine Ulfbert swords, forged from high-purity crucible steel, and imitation Ulfbert swords, made from lower-quality bloomery steel but bearing similar inscriptions. Some inscriptions are slightly misspelled, some lack the crosses. This suggests counterfeiting. Even in the 9th century, brand reputation mattered. If Ulfbert blades were superior, others attempted to replicate the name to capitalize on that prestige. But that only reinforces the core anomaly. How did genuine Ulfbert blades achieve such purity? The carbon content in authentic examples ranges around 0.8% to 1.2%, optimal for strong, flexible steel. European bloomery iron rarely exceeded 0.3% carbon. The difference is significant, and then there is the consistency. Medieval swords often varied widely in composition from tip to hilt, but Ulfbert blades demonstrate remarkable uniformity. This suggests advanced temperature control and metallurgical understanding. Without modern thermometers, without industrial furnaces, without dendritized chemistry, it suggests access to techniques or materials outside typical regional capability. The timeline complicates things further. After the 11th century, authentic Ulfbert swords disappear. Around the same time, Central Asian trade routes shifted. The collapse of certain Islamic trade networks and political upheaval disrupted long-distance commerce. If Ulfbert blades relied on imported crucible steel, the disappearance aligns with supply chain breakdown. In that case, the mystery becomes less supernatural and more economic. But it still leaves open an extraordinary reality. For roughly 2 centuries, a group of European smiths produced swords that outperformed most others of their time, and then that advantage vanished. Imagine holding one of these blades. It would have felt lighter, stronger, more resilient. In combat, such superiority could mean survival. The Vikings valued weapon quality deeply. Swords were heirlooms, named, passed down generations. If Ulfbert blades held measurable advantage, their reputation would spread quickly, which explains imitation attempts. But what explains the original breakthrough? Did a single smith unlock crucible steel production in Europe and keep it secret, or did trade quietly transfer advanced materials without widespread technological adoption? Archaeological evidence does not show crucible furnaces operating in Northern Europe at the time, yet the steel exists. Scientific testing confirms its composition. The blades are real, and they represent technological knowledge that appears, then fades. History often assumes steady progress, but Ulfbert's sword suggests something different: isolated excellence, brief windows of advancement, followed by regression. This pattern appears elsewhere in history: Roman concrete superior to modern mixes, Greek fire lost to time, the Antikythera mechanism predating complex gears by over a millennium. Human knowledge does not always accumulate linearly. Sometimes it flickers, a spark in darkness, then gone. Standing in a museum today, viewing an Ulfbert sword behind glass, one sees a modest blade, no glowing aura, no futuristic design, just steel. And a name, plus BLFBRS plus etched with crosses, as if invoking protection, or authority, or ownership. Was Ulfbert a person? Perhaps, but more likely it was a workshop brand, a guarantee, a symbol of quality in a brutal age. And the imitations reveal how valuable that symbol became. Counterfeit blades with flawed inscriptions appear widely. Some lack the final T, others replace letters. In some cases, smiths attempted to copy the name without understanding its meaning. Even in the 9th century, market dynamics operated. Prestige mattered, but authenticity could be tested in battle. Inferior steel bends, it shatters, it fails. Genuine Ulfbert blades likely held reputation because they did not, and so we are left with a paradox: a medieval weapon that appears technologically ahead of its era, explained partially by trade, partially by innovation, but not fully by local metallurgy. The steel's purity is measurable fact, the inscription is visible fact, the disappearance aligns with trade disruption. And yet, the precise pathway of knowledge remains incomplete. How did crucible steel travel thousands of miles, Who decided to engrave the name? Why did no other workshops replicate the exact process successfully afterward? Perhaps the secret was never written down. Perhaps it was held by a small circle of craftsmen. And when that circle dissolved, through death, war, or economic collapse, the technique dissolved with them. History leaves us fragments, blades in soil, names in steel, and gaps in understanding. The Ulfbert swords are not evidence of time travel, nor proof of lost civilizations. They are something subtler. Proof that history contains pockets of sophistication we are still piecing together. They remind us that the past was not primitive. It was complex, connected, capable of surprising precision, and occasionally capable of producing something that seems to belong to the future. As cold light reflects off the polished blade behind museum glass, the inscription still reads clearly after 1,000 years, plus VLF, BRS plus, T-name that traveled across battlefields, across centuries, across mystery, and still asks quietly, what else have we underestimated about the medieval world? The Voynich manuscript, the book no one can read. There are books that contain lost knowledge. There are books that preserve forgotten languages. And then there is a book that refuses to be understood at all. It sits today in a climate-controlled archive at Yale University, bound in worn vellum, filled with looping script and strange botanical drawings that resemble nothing on Earth. No one knows who wrote it. No one knows what it says. This is the Voynich manuscript, often described as the world's most mysterious book. It surfaced publicly in 1912, when rare book dealer Wilfred Voynich purchased it from a Jesuit college in Italy. But carbon dating later revealed that the vellum, the parchment pages, dates back to the early 15th century, around 1404 to 1438. That places its creation in medieval Europe. And yet, 6 centuries later, its language remains undeciphered. The manuscript spans approximately 240 pages. The script is consistent throughout, flowing, repetitive, structured. It is not random scribbling. It resembles a natural language, complete with recurring word patterns and grammatical-like repetition, but no one has successfully translated it. Not cryptographers, not linguists, not historians. Even code breakers who cracked enemy encryption during World War II studied it, without success. The manuscript is divided into sections. The first appears botanical, filled with detailed illustrations of plants. But these plants do not match known species. Some resemble composites, part fern, part root, part imagination. The second section contains astronomical diagrams, circular charts resembling zodiac wheels. The third shows dozens of nude female figures immersed in green pools connected by strange pipe-like structures. The fourth section appears pharmaceutical, jars, containers, herbal-like diagrams. And the final section consists of continuous text with star-like symbols marking paragraphs. The images feel symbolic, but symbolic of what? The script contains around 20 to 25 unique characters. Some appear frequently, others rarely. Statistical analysis suggests the writing follows patterns similar to natural languages. Word lengths cluster predictably. Certain words appear more often at the beginning or end of paragraphs. This suggests it is not random gibberish, and yet no known European language matches it. Some proposed it was written in an unknown dialect. Others argue it may encode an existing language using a substitution cipher, but if so, the cipher is remarkably resistant. Modern artificial intelligence has been applied to the manuscript. Algorithms have analyzed frequency patterns. Machine learning models have attempted structural decoding. And still, no consensus has emerged. One theory suggests the manuscript is a hoax, a medieval prank, a meaningless text designed to appear mysterious. But this explanation faces challenges. Creating 240 pages of structured nonsense, complete with consistent statistical properties mimicking real language, would require extraordinary effort. And for what purpose? There is no evidence the manuscript generated wealth or fame for its creator. Another theory proposes that it is written in a constructed language, perhaps invented by its author. If so, it may not correspond to any known linguistic family. But why invent an entire writing system and language without leaving explanatory keys? Some researchers believe the manuscript may encode knowledge related to herbal medicine or alchemy. The botanical illustrations suggest medicinal interest. The zodiac charts imply astrological influence. The bathing women may represent therapeutic practices or spiritual symbolism, but without translation, interpretation becomes speculation. The manuscript's ownership history deepens the intrigue. At one point, it belonged to Emperor Rudolf II of the Holy Roman Empire, a ruler known for collecting occult texts and alchemical manuscripts. A letter discovered inside suggests Rudolf may have purchased it for a large sum, believing it to be the work of Roger Bacon, a 13th-century English philosopher known for experimental science. But carbon dating disproved that attribution. The manuscript is at least a century younger, and yet its origin remains elusive. No signature, no author's note, no deciphered preface. The ink composition aligns with medieval materials. The vellum is authentic. The binding shows age. Everything suggests it is real. But real does not mean understood. What makes the Voynich manuscript particularly unsettling is its resistance. Human beings have deciphered ancient scripts before. Egyptian hieroglyphs were unlocked using the Rosetta Stone. Cuneiform was deciphered through bilingual inscriptions. Even lost languages can be reconstructed through comparative linguistics. But the Voynich manuscript offers no bilingual key, no reference point. It stands alone, a closed system. And that isolation makes it difficult to penetrate. Some have suggested it may represent glossolalia, meaningless but structured writing produced during trance states. Others propose it could encode multiple languages simultaneously, layered through complex ciphering. Still others argue that it may represent a women's health manual disguised to avoid censorship during restrictive periods. The nude female figures bathing in green pools remain among the most debated images. Are they symbolic of healing waters, astrological phases, alchemy, or something entirely mundane? The illustrations feel intentional, not amateur, not chaotic. They suggest someone invested time and skill into crafting this manuscript. Why invest such effort into something unreadable? Unless it was readable, at least to someone. Perhaps the manuscript was intended for a very small audience, a secret society, an individual patron, or even a single student. And if the key was lost, burned, destroyed, forgotten, the text becomes sealed permanently. Language is fragile. It survives only through transmission. Once transmission stops, comprehension fades. What if the Voynich manuscript represents a language that existed briefly and then vanished? A linguistic island that sank without leaving descendants. Statistical analysis indicates that the text does not behave like random noise. It contains entropy levels similar to natural language. Word repetition patterns are neither too predictable nor too chaotic. This has led many linguists to reject the hoax theory. But absence of translation remains the ultimate barrier. Standing before a digital scan of its pages, one feels a peculiar sensation. Recognition without understanding. The script looks almost familiar, almost pronounceable, yet meaning remains inaccessible. The drawings appear medicinal, but not identifiable. The zodiac symbols resemble known constellations, but are not exact. It is as if the manuscript exists in a parallel version of our world, close enough to feel real, different enough to remain unreachable. Perhaps that is why it continues to fascinate, because it exposes a limit, a boundary between what we can decode and what resists us. In an age where satellites map planets and artificial intelligence translates languages instantly, one medieval book still stands defiant. It reminds us that knowledge can be lost not only through destruction, but through isolation, through obscurity, through the quiet disappearance of context. The Voynich manuscript does not threaten history. It does not rewrite timelines. It simply withholds. And in withholding, it challenges assumption. We assume that given enough time and analysis, all puzzles yield. But what if some texts remain sealed indefinitely? What if some authors wrote knowing that understanding might one day vanish? And so the manuscript remains where it has rested for centuries, ink on vellum, script without voice, plants without species, women without names, a language that appears to speak, but says nothing we can hear. And perhaps the most unsettling possibility is this. What if it is not meant to be deciphered? What if its mystery is not a flaw, but its purpose. The Antikythera mechanism, the ancient computer that shouldn't exist in 1901, sponge divers working off the coast of a small Greek island descended into waters thick with history. They were not looking for revolution, they were looking for sponges. But 45 meters below the surface, near the rocky shores of Antikythera, they found the remains of a Roman-era shipwreck. Bronze statues lay scattered across the seabed, ceramic jars, fragments of marble. It looked like a typical ancient cargo vessel, one more relic swallowed by the sea, and then they pulled up a corroded lump of bronze and wood. At first glance, it appeared unremarkable. Just another artifact damaged by centuries underwater. But when the encrusted mass split open in a museum laboratory months later, something impossible appeared inside. Gears. Not simple gears, not decorative ones, but intricate, interlocking bronze gear wheels, dozens of them, arranged with precision. The artifact would eventually be known as the Antikythera mechanism, and it would challenge everything we thought we knew about ancient technology. Radiocarbon analysis and stylistic study date the device to around 100 BCE. More than 2,000 years ago, at that time, Europe did not possess mechanical clocks. There were no industrial tools, no documented complex gear systems of comparable sophistication, and yet here was a hand-powered device capable of predicting astronomical events. The mechanism originally sat inside a wooden box about the size of a shoebox. On its face were dials and inscriptions. On its interior were at least 30 bronze gears, possibly more, since some fragments are missing. When rotated by a hand crank, the device could predict the positions of the sun and moon. It could forecast eclipses. It could track the cycles of the Olympic Games. It even modeled the irregular orbit of the moon using a differential gear, a mechanical principle not seen again until the 16th century. That detail alone stunned historians. Differential gearing, a system that accounts for variable motion, was thought to be a Renaissance innovation. Yet here it was, embedded in a corroded mass pulled from a Roman shipwreck. How? Ancient Greece was rich in mathematics and astronomy. Figures like Hipparchus and Archimedes developed complex geometric theories. Theoretical knowledge existed, but translating theory into precise mechanical engineering requires advanced craftsmanship. Gear teeth must be cut accurately. Radios must be calculated correctly. Alignment must be exact. The Antikythera mechanism suggests a workshop capable of extraordinary precision, and yet no similar devices have ever been found. No factory remains, no blueprint archive, no instructional manual. The mechanism stands alone, a technological island. X-ray imaging and 3D scanning conducted in the 21st century revealed hidden inscriptions on its surfaces, thousands of Greek characters etched in tiny lettering. These inscriptions functioned like a user manual, describing the astronomical cycles displayed on its dials. The device tracked the Metonic cycle, a 19-year period after which lunar phases repeat on the same calendar dates. It tracked the Saros cycle, predicting eclipses approximately every 18 years. This was not decorative science, it was functional prediction, an analog computer. 2 millennia before the term existed, the ship that carried it likely sailed from the eastern Mediterranean toward Rome. Some believe the mechanism may have originated in Rhodes, an island known for advanced astronomy and engineering schools during the Hellenistic period. The philosopher Posidonius lived there. So did astronomers influenced by Hipparchus. Perhaps the mechanism was built in such a center of learning. Perhaps it was intended as a teaching tool, or as a luxury item for an elite Roman patron fascinated by celestial order. But if such workshops existed, why have no others been discovered? Why is this the only example? Bronze was valuable in antiquity. Many ancient devices were melted down over centuries for reuse. It is possible that similar mechanisms once existed, only to be recycled into weapons or statues. If so, the Antikythera mechanism may not have been unique. It may simply be the only survivor, but survival alone does not diminish its anomaly, because the technological sophistication displayed was not rediscovered in Europe until medieval clockmaking centuries later. After the fall of Rome, complex geared machinery largely vanished from European production. Why? The Roman Empire collapsed. Trade networks fragmented, knowledge transmission became unstable, libraries burned, engineers disappeared into history. It is possible that the expertise required to build such devices faded with political upheaval. Technological regression is not impossible. History shows that advancements can stall, be forgotten, be rediscovered later. Still, the Antikythera mechanism feels different because it was not simply advanced, it was precise. Its gear ratios align with astronomical calculations remarkably well. Modern reconstructions have demonstrated its functional accuracy. It was not symbolic, it worked. Imagine standing in a quiet workshop in ancient Greece, bronze filings on a wooden table, a craftsman carefully cutting gear teeth by hand, measuring angles with calipers, assembling layers of rotating discs, aligning inscriptions to predict eclipses decades into the future. This was not crude engineering. It required planning, mathematics, patience. But why build such a device? For navigation? Perhaps indirectly, but its primary function appears educational and predictive rather than practical for sea travel. It may have served as a portable model of the cosmos, a demonstration of celestial harmony. Ancient Greek philosophy often emphasized cosmic order, the idea that the universe operates according to rational principles. The mechanism may have embodied that belief. A mechanical universe in miniature, a box that mirrored the heavens, and yet its existence disrupts modern assumptions about technological progression. We tend to imagine history as a staircase, each century climbing higher in complexity. The Antikythera mechanism suggests something else. A peak, followed by a valley, then another climb centuries later. What other technologies have been lost? What other devices existed briefly, only to disappear? The mechanism was discovered by accident. A storm forced divers off course. Had they not found that shipwreck, we might never have known such a device existed. How many more lie beneath the sea, or buried beneath cities built atop ancient ruins? The Antikythera mechanism does not suggest alien intervention. It does not require supernatural explanation. Ancient Greeks were capable of extraordinary mathematics. What it suggests instead is that human capability often exceeds historical narrative, that advanced knowledge can exist without leaving broad traces, that singular artifacts can challenge entire timelines. Standing before a reconstructed model today, watching the gears rotate in synchronized rhythm, one feels a quiet awe. It is not dramatic, not explosive, but elegant. A device that predicts eclipses with bronze wheels and hand-cranked motion. Built before the birth of Christ, then lost, then found again 2,000 years later. It is easy to romanticize it, to see it as proof forgotten golden ages. But perhaps it is simpler. Perhaps it is evidence that human curiosity has always pushed boundaries, and that occasionally those boundaries were pushed further than we realized. The Antikythera mechanism is not a threat to history. It is an expansion of it, a reminder that technological innovation did not begin in the Industrial Revolution. It flickered long before, in workshops we no longer see, in minds whose names we may never know. And perhaps that is the most humbling part. The device exists. Its gears still turn in modern replicas. Its predictions align with astronomical reality, and yet the full context of its creation remains incomplete. A machine from the ancient world that behaves like it belongs centuries later. Recovered from the sea. Reassembled by modern science. Still asking quietly, what else did they build? The plain of jars, the silent fields of stone across the rolling hills of northern Laos, where mist settles in the early morning and the landscape rises in quiet waves of green. There are fields filled with stone, not scattered randomly, not shaped like ruins of walls or temples, but arranged across hillsides in clusters, hundreds upon hundreds of massive stone jars. This is the Plain of Jars, one of Southeast Asia's most enigmatic archaeological sites. Some jars stand alone. Others gather in groups of dozens. The largest weigh up to 14 tons. Many reach over 2 meters tall. They are carved from solid stone, sandstone, granite, conglomerate, quarried from distant locations and transported to elevated plateaus, and no one knows exactly why. The jars are ancient. Radiocarbon dating of nearby human remains suggests they may have been placed here between 500 BCE and 500 CE. That spans nearly a millennium, yet no inscriptions mark them. No carved narratives explain their purpose. No surviving texts describe their construction. Only stone containers resting quietly across fields shaped by time. At first glance, the jars appear simple, cylindrical forms with flat bases and hollow interiors. But closer inspection reveals careful craftsmanship. The rims are shaped intentionally. Some jars feature subtle decorative elements, carved lips or relief bands. Others remain unadorned. Many stand upright, some lie broken. And scattered email are stone discs, sometimes believed to be lids, but many jars lack any lid at all. Local legends attempt explanation. One story speaks of giants who once inhabited the region. After winning a great battle, they created the jars to brew rice wine in celebration. Another legend claims the jars were containers for fermenting liquor for a victorious king. These stories offer cultural texture, but archaeology seeks material answers. In the 1930s, French archaeologist Madeleine Colani conducted the first systematic study of the site. She proposed that the jars were part of ancient burial practices. Excavations revealed human remains buried near the jars, cremated bones, teeth, grave goods such as beads and pottery. This led to the theory that the jars may have served as secondary burial containers. Bodies may have been placed inside temporarily to decompose, then later removed for final burial elsewhere. This practice is known in other ancient cultures, but direct evidence linking jar interiors to decomposition remains limited. Few intact remains have been found inside the jars themselves. Instead, burials are often located around them, which raises questions. Were the jars symbolic markers rather than containers? Ceremonial monuments rather than practical vessels? The transportation alone demands explanation. Many jars were carved from stone not found locally. Quarries identified up to 10 kilometers away suggest heavy labor. Transporting multi-ton blocks uphill without modern machinery would require coordination, manpower, and engineering knowledge. Wooden rollers, ramps, rope systems. It was possible, but not trivial. Why invest such effort? The jars are not uniform. Some are small enough for one person to peer inside. Others tower above head height. Their distribution spans dozens of sites across the Shin Kowang Plateau. Over 2,000 jars have been documented. But due to unexploded ordnance from conflicts during the Vietnam War era, many areas remain inaccessible. Ironically, the site endured ancient mystery, only to be endangered by modern warfare. Some jar clusters align with hilltops offering wide views. Others sit in valleys. No obvious astronomical pattern has been confirmed. No clear geometric alignment governs their placement. This randomness complicates interpretation. If they were tomb markers, one might expect structured arrangement. If they were storage containers, proximity to settlements might be expected, but evidence of large permanent settlements nearby remains limited. Another hypothesis suggests the jars may have been used to collect rainwater for travelers along trade routes. The plateau once connected communities across Southeast Asia, but the scale seems excessive for simple hydration, and many jars lack signs of water erosion inside. Then there is the matter of age. The jars predate many known kingdoms in the region. They represent a cultural layer whose identity remains partly obscured. The people who carved them left no known written language behind. Their pottery fragments and burial goods hint at complex society, but names are lost. Ethnic affiliations debated. Even the number of communities involved remains uncertain. The jars do not form a single monument. They are dispersed, like punctuation marks across landscape. Standing among them at sunrise when mist curls around their edges and silence stretches across the plateau, one feels an unusual stillness. The jars do not dominate the landscape like pyramids. They do not rise dramatically like temples. They simply sit, massive, patient, some weathered smooth by centuries of wind, others cracked, yet enduring. It is their simplicity that makes them unsettling, because they appear functional, yet their function remains ambiguous. Archaeologists have recovered glass beads, bronze objects, iron tools from burial contexts. This suggests trade networks existed. But none of these artifacts explain the jars themselves. Modern technology has assisted analysis. Ground-penetrating radar identifies subsurface features. Chemical testing examines soil residues inside jars, but no definitive organic residue conclusively confirms fermentation. No bone fragments definitively prove widespread jar internment. The evidence remains suggestive, not decisive. Perhaps that is why the plain of jars persists as a mystery. It offers fragments without resolution, and human imagination fills gaps. Were they part of funerary rites involving sky burials? Did they symbolize clan territories? Were they markers of social status? Or did they serve a purpose so culturally specific that modern categories fail to capture it? One must also consider environmental context. The plateau experiences seasonal monsoons. Heavy rains could erode burial grounds. Elevated jars may have preserved remains above flood levels. But again, that theory remains partial. The jars feel deliberate, intentional, collective, not the work of a small, isolated group, but of communities investing labor across generations. And yet, unlike Egyptian pyramids or Mayan temples, they did not leave behind carved narratives celebrating their builders. They are anonymous, which may be why they fascinate, because they represent an entire culture speaking in stone, without words. Time moves differently in such places. Modern roads wind past jar sites. Tourists visit certain cleared areas, but much of the plateau remains quiet, and some jars sit in fields where farmers still work nearby. Ancient and present intersect casually. No grand fences, no massive reconstruction, just stone vessels resting where they have for over 2,000 years. Archaeologists continue to excavate cautiously, mindful of unexploded bombs still buried beneath the soil. The modern danger adds another layer of complexity. History layered upon history. War layered upon ancient ritual. The plain of jars does not offer spectacle. It offers endurance. It reminds us that monumentality does not always require towering architecture. Sometimes it is repetition. Hundreds of similar forms across miles of terrain. And perhaps that repetition was the point. Collective memory made visible. A landscape transformed into ritual space. Or perhaps something simpler. Perhaps the jars once held offerings. Grain, liquids, ashes, objects now dissolved by time. Organic materials leave little trace after millennia. Stone remains, and we interpret from absence. Standing between two jars as wind brushes across grass and distant hills fade into haze, one feels the weight not only of stone but of lost context. We have names for many ancient civilizations, but the people of the plain of jars remain unnamed in textbooks, their language silent, their stories unrecorded. Only these hollow vessels endure. And perhaps that is their quiet message, that civilizations need not carve narratives to leave impact, that stone can outlast speech, that sometimes the most profound mysteries are not about catastrophic events or lost technologies, but about purpose. Simple, enduring purpose. 2,000 jars, across rolling hills, carved, transported, placed, and left behind, still waiting. The disappearance of Lake Antikuni, the village that vanished overnight in the far northern reaches of Canada, where the tundra stretches endlessly beneath pale Arctic skies, there is a lake that carries a story colder than the wind that sweeps across it. The land around it is vast, isolated, quiet in a way that feels permanent. And in November of 1930, that silence became something else. Near the remote shores of Lake Antikuni, a small Inuit settlement was said to have disappeared, not gradually, not through migration, but suddenly. According to the story, a fur trapper named Joe LaBelle arrived to the village expecting to trade supplies and rest. He had visited before. He knew the families. He knew the layout of their tents and small structures, but when he arrived that evening, something felt wrong. There was no smoke rising from the huts, no voices, no dogs barking. He entered one of the dwellings. Food sat on tables. Clothing remained inside. Rifles leaned against walls. And yet there were no people. The entire village, dozens of men, women, and children, was gone. LaBelle reportedly searched the surrounding area. No tracks led away from the settlement. No signs of struggle. No visible explanation. In some versions of the story, the sled dogs were found dead, tethered and starved. In others, graves in the nearby burial ground had been disturbed. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police were said to have investigated, but when records were later examined, official documentation was thin. In fact, the mystery becomes more complicated when we look closely at its origins. The earliest published account appeared in newspapers months after the alleged discovery. The story spread rapidly. Headlines described a vanished village. Articles emphasized the eerie abandonment, but independent confirmation proved difficult. Some historians suggest the event may have been exaggerated or entirely fabricated. Records from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police do not clearly support a mass disappearance at Lake Anjikuni in 1930. No large-scale search operation is well documented. No missing persons reports confirm dozens of vanished Inuit families. This raises an uncomfortable question. Did the disappearance happen at all? Or did a story grow from rumor into legend? To answer that, one must consider the context of northern Canada in the early 20th century. The Arctic was sparsely monitored. Communication between remote communities and southern authorities was limited. Newspapers often relied on second-hand reports. Sensational stories of mystery and danger in the north captivated readers. A tale of an entire village vanishing overnight would have sold papers. But absence of documentation does not automatically equal absence of event. Remote settlements sometimes relocated seasonally. Inuit communities often moved based on hunting patterns. Food scarcity, environmental change, or resource depletion could prompt sudden departure. If LaBelle arrived shortly after such relocation, the village might have appeared abandoned unexpectedly. But would food truly be left on tables? Would dogs be left tethered to starve? Those dramatic details appear primarily in newspaper retellings, and that introduces another layer to the mystery, the evolution of narrative. Over time, the story accumulated additional elements: disturbed graves, strange lights in the sky, frozen bodies. Each retelling amplified the sense of anomaly, yet the earliest accounts were less elaborate. This pattern suggests folklore development rather than confirmed tragedy. Still, the idea lingers, because the Arctic itself feels like a place where disappearance is plausible. Blizzards can erase tracks within hours. Cold can claim lives quickly. A small settlement could face starvation or forced relocation without leaving obvious signs, and communication delays would prevent immediate clarification. So perhaps the mystery lies not in supernatural disappearance, but in documentation gaps. When LaBelle reported his discovery, it is possible that he encountered a temporarily abandoned camp, or misinterpreted signs, or relayed information the journalist later dramatized. It would not be the first time remote events were reshaped through storytelling, yet even skepticism cannot entirely erase the haunting quality of the story. Imagine arriving at a familiar place expecting warmth and conversation, and finding silence, cooking utensils left behind, personal belongings untouched, footprints already fading in wind-blown snow. Even if the explanation is mundane, the experience would feel unsettling. The Arctic amplifies isolation. Sound travels differently in open tundra. Darkness falls quickly in winter. In that environment, absence becomes magnified. Perhaps that is why the Lake Anjikuni story persists, because it embodies a deeper fear, the fear of communities erased, the fear of being cut off from explanation, the fear that in certain landscapes human presence is fragile. The Inuit communities of the North have long demonstrated resilience in harsh conditions. They understand seasonal movement, hunting cycles, survival strategies. It is unlikely that an entire village would vanish without trace or reason. More likely is that relocation occurred, misunderstood by an outsider, or that the event was inflated through storytelling. Modern researchers who examine the case have found little physical evidence supporting mass disappearance. No archaeological findings confirm abandoned dwellings matching the dramatic accounts. No clear cemetery disturbance verified, and yet the legend survives in books, documentaries, and online discussions. Why? Because mystery fills silence easily. In places where documentation is sparse, narrative becomes dominant. The Arctic leaves few records. Snow covers evidence. Wind erases footprints. Time dissolves structures. And newspapers of the 1930s were not always meticulous in verification. Still, the Lake Anjikuni story taps into something deeper. The idea that entire communities can disappear without explanation resonates with other global legends. Roanoke in North America, lost expeditions in polar regions, ships found adrift without crew. We are unsettled by collective absence. One person missing is tragedy. An entire village missing becomes myth. Perhaps that is the most important lesson of Lake Anjikuni. That mystery sometimes arises not from unexplained physics or unknown technology, but from narrative gaps, from incomplete records, from human imagination filling empty space. Standing beside Lake Anjikuni today, one sees no evidence of supernatural event. The lake remains. The tundra stretches outward. Modern Inuit communities continue life across the region. The land holds continuity, not catastrophe, but stories linger. And in cold northern air, stories carry weight. They echo differently. The Lake Anjikuni disappearance may not represent a solved mystery, nor an unsolved one. It may represent something in between, a case study in how legend forms, how isolation amplifies imagination, how the unknown invites embellishment. And perhaps that is the quiet truth, that sometimes the greatest mystery is not what happened, but how we tell what happened. Did a village vanish overnight? Or did a story take shape in a time and place where verification was difficult? The Arctic does not answer. It rarely does. It absorbs questions the way snow absorbs sound. And in that stillness, the Lake Anjikuni legend remains suspended. A tale of silence, of absence, of a settlement that may have disappeared, or may have simply moved on. Either way, it reminds us that in remote places, certainty can be as fragile as footprints in fresh snow. The Nazca Lines, messages written for the sky. In the southern desert of Peru, where rain almost never falls and the earth stretches outward in endless shades of red and brown, something enormous lies hidden in plain sight. From ground level, it is nearly invisible. But from above, the desert reveals itself as a canvas. Lines run straight for kilometers. Perfect geometric shapes stretch across the plateau, and massive figures, hummingbirds, monkeys, spiders, appear etched into the earth itself. These are the Nazca Lines, one of the most enigmatic archaeological sites in the world. Created between 500 BCE and 500 CE by the Nazca culture, these geoglyphs cover nearly 450 square kilometers of desert. Some lines run perfectly straight for over 30 kilometers. The animal figures measure up to 300 meters in length. And the most perplexing detail? They can only be fully seen from the sky. When first documented systematically in the early 20th century, the lines stunned researchers. How did an ancient culture without aerial technology create images so proportionally accurate at massive scale? The technique itself appears simple. The Nazca people removed the dark reddish stones covering the desert surface, exposing the lighter soil beneath. The contrast created visible lines. Because the region is extremely dry and wind patterns are stable, the lines have survived for over 1,500 years. But simplicity of method does not explain precision of design. Creating straight lines over kilometers requires surveying skills. Maintaining proportion in large animal figures requires planning. Archaeologists have found wooden stakes in the ground that may have been used as guides. Experiments have demonstrated that small teams using rope and stakes can produce large geoglyphs without aerial perspective, so technically it was possible. But why do it? That question remains unsettled. Early theories suggested astronomical alignment. Some researchers proposed that certain lines align with solstices, equinoxes, or celestial events. Given that many ancient cultures closely observed the sky, this seemed plausible. However, comprehensive analysis has shown that while some alignments exist, most lines do not correspond consistently to astronomical patterns. The majority appear arbitrary. Another theory suggests ritual pathways. Some lines are wide enough for groups of people to walk along. Perhaps they were ceremonial routes, processional paths used during rituals. The desert itself may have been sacred. Walking the lines could have been part of spiritual practice. The animal figures might represent deities or mythological beings connected to fertility, water, or agriculture. Water, in particular, is critical. The Nazca region is one of the driest places on Earth. Rainfall is scarce. Yet the Nazca culture developed sophisticated underground aqueduct systems called pukios to access groundwater. Some researchers propose that the lines may have been connected symbolically to water rituals, appeals to gods for rain. The spider, for example, is associated in some Andean traditions with fertility and rainfall. The hummingbird may represent messengers between worlds, but symbolism does not fully explain scale. Why draw figures so large that they can only be appreciated from above? One suggestion is that the lines were meant for the gods, visible from the sky. If the Nazca believed their deities watched from above, creating massive images would be a form of offering, a way of communicating devotion on a scale impossible to ignore. This interpretation frames the desert as a sacred canvas, but it also raises further questions. Why such variety? Over 70 animal figures have been identified, along with hundreds of geometric patterns and thousands of straight lines. Some figures overlap older ones, suggesting long-term use and evolving design. The site was not created in a single event. It developed over centuries, which means the motivation endured. The Nazca culture itself left behind pottery, textiles, and burial sites. They were skilled artisans. Their iconography includes many of the same animal forms seen in the geoglyphs. This suggests continuity between portable art and desert drawings, but the scale difference remains striking. Small ceramic motifs translated into designs spanning football fields. In the 20th century, more speculative theories emerged. Some proposed extraterrestrial involvement, suggesting the lines were landing strips for alien spacecraft. This idea gained popularity largely because of the aerial visibility issue, but there is no evidence supporting alien contact. The lines are shallow, only about 10 to 15 centimeters deep. They would not support aircraft landing, and many are not straight or flat enough for that purpose. Such theories reveal more about modern fascination with the unknown than about ancient reality. More recent research using drone imaging and satellite technology has identified additional smaller geoglyphs, some previously unnoticed. This suggests the site may be even more complex than originally thought. Interestingly, some of the newer discoveries are smaller and more detailed, perhaps created in later periods. The Nazca lines were not static, they evolved, which reinforces the idea that they served ongoing cultural or ritual functions. Standing at one of the designated observation towers today, looking across the desert at a faint outline of the hummingbird, one feels a strange disorientation. From ground level, the image is abstract. It does not reveal itself easily. It requires elevation, perspective. Perhaps that was intentional. Perhaps only certain ritual leaders climbed surrounding hills to view the designs. Or perhaps the act of creation mattered more than the final view. The process of carving the lines may have been communal, reinforcing identity and belief through shared labor. The desert becomes both altar and archive. There is also the matter of scale relative to human life. Creating lines kilometers long requires coordination, planning, commitment. The Nazca culture invested time and energy into something not immediately practical. In a harsh desert environment where survival depended on water management and agriculture, dedicating labor to geoglyphs suggests deep cultural significance. The lines are not defensive structures, not irrigation channels. They are symbolic, which makes them powerful. Archaeological evidence suggests that Nazca society eventually declined, possibly due to environmental strain. Deforestation and climate shifts may have reduced water availability. As resources dwindled, cultural priorities shifted. The creation of large geoglyphs appears to have ceased, but the lines remained, preserved by climate, guarded by dryness, and rediscovered centuries later when airplanes revealed their full scale. The Nazca lines remind us that ancient cultures engaged with landscape in ways we still struggle to interpret. They did not write extensive texts explaining their intentions. They expressed meaning spatially, visually, geographically. The desert itself became medium, and perhaps that is why the mystery persists. Because the lines do not offer explanation, they offer presence. They stretch across miles without inscription. They depict creatures without narrative. They invite interpretation but resist conclusion. Are they astronomical calendars? Ceremonial walkways, water rituals, offerings to sky gods, or something else entirely? something modern frameworks fail to capture. The Nazca Lines sit quietly beneath the Peruvian sun. Tour planes circle above daily. Researchers continue to map and analyze, but no single theory has resolved all questions, and maybe that is appropriate, because the lines are not puzzles designed to be solved, they are expressions. An expression does not always translate. When the sun lowers and shadows lengthen across the plateau, the lines fade slightly into the desert tones. From certain angles, they almost disappear, as if reminding us that perspective defines visibility. Perhaps the Nazca people understood that. Perhaps they knew that meaning sometimes requires distance, height, time, and so the desert remains marked, with lines that stretch toward horizons, with figures that gaze skyward, and with a question that continues to hover above them. Who were they drawing for? The Oakville blobs. When the sky rained flesh on an August morning in 1994, in the quiet town of Oakville, Washington, the rain began to fall. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The Pacific Northwest is no stranger to drizzle. Clouds roll in from the coast, mist settles over fields, and life continues beneath gray skies. But this rain was different. It did not fall like water. It fell in clusters, clear, gelatinous clusters. Residents stepped outside and found small, translucent blobs scattered across rooftops, cars, lawns, and streets. They were about the size of grains of rice or larger clumps of jelly. Sticky, soft, almost alive in appearance. Within days, several townspeople reported flu-like symptoms, nausea, dizziness, difficulty breathing. Pets became ill. Some described the material as resembling pieces of tissue, and the story quickly grew beyond the town itself. The phenomenon became known as the Oakville blobs, and from the beginning, it defied easy explanation. Samples were collected and sent for laboratory analysis. Early reports suggested the blobs contained human white blood cells. Later tests indicated the presence of bacteria commonly found in human digestive systems. But official documentation remains inconsistent. Some accounts describe inconclusive findings. Others suggest contamination during testing. The Washington State Department of Health conducted investigations but did not release definitive conclusions linking the material to human tissue. So what exactly fell from the sky? One explanation proposes that the blobs were biological material released during military exercises. Naval operations were occurring offshore around that time. Some speculate that aircraft may have dumped waste or byproducts at high altitude, but there is no official confirmation of such release, and the gelatinous consistency does not align clearly with known aviation waste disposal. Another theory suggests the blobs were colonies of cyanobacteria, sometimes called blue-green algae. Under certain conditions, large clusters can form and become airborne through ocean spray or atmospheric currents. When falling to Earth, they could appear gelatinous, but cyanobacteria typically appear greenish or bluish. The Oakville substance was described as mostly clear. Then there is the theory of star jelly. Throughout history, reports have emerged of mysterious gelatinous material appearing after meteor showers. In folklore, star jelly was believed to fall from the sky following celestial events. Modern explanations suggest that some of these incidents involve amphibian eggs, jellyfish fragments, or biological matter dispersed by storms. Could the Oakville blobs have originated from aquatic life lifted by water spouts or tornadic winds? The town lies near coastal waters. Strong updrafts can carry marine organisms into clouds. When atmospheric conditions shift, debris may fall elsewhere, but this theory struggles with scale. Residents reported multiple days of blob rainfall, not a single isolated event, and the timing did not clearly align with major storms or waterspouts. Eyewitness accounts describe the material as cohesive, clumped in uniform masses rather than scattered debris. It did not resemble rain mixed with organic matter. It appeared as distinct gelatinous drops. Local resident Sonny Barclift, whose mother reportedly fell ill after handling the substance, described finding dozens of blobs on her property. She collected samples in her freezer. Her story attracted national attention. Television crews arrived. Speculation intensified. Some residents linked the illness directly to the blobs. Others dismissed coincidence. Medical records did not conclusively establish causation. Flu-like symptoms are common and can emerge for many reasons. The timing could have been unrelated. But when unexplained material falls from the sky and illness follows, human perception draws connection naturally. Scientists later suggested the possibility of jellyfish bloom fragments. Large blooms of small jellyfish can occur in ocean waters. If disturbed by turbulence, pieces might become airborne. But jellyfish tissue typically breaks down quickly outside water, and Oakville lies inland, though not far from the Pacific. Atmospheric modeling has not conclusively supported this scenario. Adding complexity, laboratory reports released publicly vary in detail. One early lab allegedly identified the material as composed of white blood cells, but experts later pointed out that without proper sterile sampling procedures, contamination could easily skew results. White blood cells can appear in many organic samples. The lack of consistent chain of custody documentation weakens certainty, which leaves us with ambiguity. Physical samples existed. Residents reported symptoms. Laboratory analysis was inconclusive, and official agencies offered no firm explanation. The Oakville blobs did not leave lasting environmental damage. No large-scale contamination followed. No long-term health crisis emerged. The phenomenon occurred, received attention, and then gradually faded from national headlines. But it never fully disappeared, because events that fall between explanation and uncertainty linger, especially when they involve the sky. Human beings are accustomed to predictable weather, rain, snow, hail, but when something unfamiliar falls from above, it disrupts psychological stability. It challenges the assumption that the atmosphere is neutral. The Oakville case gained additional intrigue due to its repetition. Reports suggest the blobs fell over multiple days in August 1994. This was not a single isolated shower, but a series. If it were biological matter lifted from the ocean, why repeat? If it were military discharge, why no documentation? If it were bacterial colonies, why no similar widespread reports elsewhere? In the absence of clarity, theories expand. Some propose experimental bioweapon testing. Others suggest extraterrestrial biological material. These theories lack evidence, but mystery invites imagination. Perhaps the most grounded explanation remains atmospheric transport of organic material. Marine bacteria and microscopic life can travel through clouds. Under rare conditions, clusters could condense and fall. The Pacific Northwest climate supports marine aerosol movement, but again, scale and gelatinous texture complicate the picture. Standing in Oakville today, the town appears ordinary. Quiet roads, green fields, gray skies typical of western Washington. There are no visible traces of the event, no plaques, no preserved sample displayed in museums, just memory and questions. The Oakville blobs illustrate something important about modern mystery. Unlike ancient enigmas carved in stone, this one occurred within living memory. Photographs exist, interviews were recorded, samples were tested, and still, no definitive answer emerged. It reminds us that uncertainty is not confined to distant centuries. Even in an era of advanced laboratories and media coverage, anomalies can resist closure. Perhaps the explanation is mundane. Perhaps it lies buried in incomplete lab reports or forgotten weather data. Perhaps it was a rare convergence of biological and atmospheric conditions unlikely to repeat. But until a clear mechanism is demonstrated conclusively, the Oakville blobs remain suspended in ambiguity, a rain of gelatinous material, an episode of illness, an investigation without resolution, and a small town briefly thrust into national curiosity. When rain falls now in Oakville, it falls normally. Water beads on grass, clouds pass overhead. But for those who remember August 1994, there is a subtle difference. Because once something unusual has fallen from the sky, ordinary rain never feels entirely ordinary again. And somewhere between the clouds and the ground, the unanswered question lingers. What exactly rained down that week? The Karnak stones, alignments beyond explanation. On the western edge of France, where the Atlantic wind moves through open fields and the horizon stretches low and wide, thousands of stones rise from the earth in long, silent rows. They are not ruins of walls. They are not scattered debris. They are deliberate, ordered, endless. This is Karnak, home to the largest concentration of standing stones in the world. More than 3,000 megaliths stretch across the Breton landscape. Some stand alone. Others form tight parallel lines extending for over 4 kilometers. And they were erected nearly 7,000 years ago. Long before the pyramids of Egypt, long before Stonehenge, long before recorded European history. No written records describe their purpose, no inscriptions explain their builders, only stone remains. The alignments of Karnak date to roughly 4,500–3,300 BCE. The largest groupings, Menek, Kermario, and Kurliskan, each contain hundreds of upright stones arranged in precise rows. Some reach 4 meters tall, others are smaller. But what strikes the observer most is repetition, row after row after row, like an army frozen in formation. From ground level, the effect is subtle, but from above, the scale becomes clear. The stones appear arranged intentionally along straight axes, not random, not chaotic. Deliberate geometry imposed upon landscape. The question is simple: why? One early theory suggested astronomical alignment. Similar to interpretations of Stonehenge, some researchers propose that Karnak stones align with solstices or lunar cycles. Indeed, certain rows appear oriented toward celestial events. But unlike Stonehenge, which forms a clear circular calendar structure, Karnak's alignments are vast and complex. Not all rows correspond neatly to astronomical positions. Some appear slightly offset, others curve subtly. The sheer number of stones complicates simple interpretation. Another hypothesis proposes that Karnak functioned as a territorial marker. In Neolithic Europe, communities were expanding. Agriculture was developing. Land boundaries may have required symbolic demarcation. Thousands of stones across kilometers could represent a monumental claim to territory, but such scale suggests more than practical marking. Transporting and erecting these stones required immense labor. Many of the stones weigh several tons. They were quarried locally but still needed shaping, moving, and positioning, without metal tools, without wheels, using ropes, wooden sledges, and manpower. The engineering challenge was significant, and yet they did it repeatedly, over centuries, which implies cultural importance beyond mere boundary marking. Some archaeologists propose ritual significance. Perhaps the stones marked sacred pathways. Ceremonial processions may have moved between them. The rows create corridors, spaces between stone lines that naturally guide movement. Walking through Karnak today feels almost like entering a silent temple without walls. The wind whistles softly, grass bends around stone bases, and the horizon seems to shift as you move between alignments. The experience feels intentional. But what was being honored? Some researchers connect Karnak to ancestor worship. Burial mounds exist in the region. Dolmens, stone tombs, dot the surrounding countryside. It is possible that Karnak formed part of a larger ritual landscape dedicated to the dead. The rows may represent clan groups, generations, or spiritual guardians, yet no clear burial remains are associated directly with most alignments. The stones themselves are largely uncarved. Unlike other megalithic monuments in Europe, Karnak stones are mostly plain. Few symbols appear, few markings. Their power lies in number and arrangement. There is also the matter of chronology. The alignments were not built all at once. Archaeological evidence suggests construction occurred in phases over hundreds of years. Communities returned repeatedly to add more stones. Why maintain such a project across generations? Cultural memory must have sustained its purpose, but that memory is lost to us. The absence of written language in Neolithic Brittany leaves only material evidence, and material evidence speaks quietly. Some fringe theories have proposed more dramatic explanations: ancient energy grids, ley lines, lost advanced civilizations, even extraterrestrial guidance. But no empirical evidence supports these claims. Karnak's mystery does not require exotic origins. It requires patience, and perhaps a willingness to accept partial knowledge. Modern surveying has revealed subtle patterns. Certain rows appear to converge toward stone circles at one end. Perhaps these circles served as gathering points. Perhaps the rows channeled movement into ritual spaces, but without contemporary explanation, interpretation remains speculative. It is also worth considering environmental context. Around 7,000 years ago, climate and coastline differed. Sea levels were lower. The landscape may have appeared more expansive. Karnak might have overlooked a broader plain or distant shoreline now submerged. What appears isolated today may have once stood at a more central crossroads. The region of Brittany contains other megalithic monuments, tumuli, passage graves, standing stones. Karnak is part of a broader tradition, but its scale surpasses most others. The sheer number, over 3,000 stones, suggests organized society capable of coordinated labor, which challenges outdated assumptions about Neolithic communities being simple or disorganized. They were sophisticated enough to mobilize effort across generations, and committed enough to maintain alignment precision. The stones vary in height, tallest at the western ends, gradually decreasing eastward. This pattern is consistent across several alignments. Why taper the stones? Was it symbolic? Did height correspond to hierarchy? Or was it practical? Larger stones easier to quarry at one end? No clear answer. When fog rolls in over the Breton fields, Karnak becomes almost otherworldly. The stones fade in and out of view. Rows dissolve into mist. It feels ancient in a way that defies measurement, because 7,000 years is difficult to grasp. These stones were standing before the invention of writing in most of Europe, before pyramids rose in Egypt, before bronze tools. They have witnessed countless seasons, empires rising and falling far beyond their horizon, yet they remain where Neolithic hands placed them. There is something humbling in that permanence. The Karnak stones do not tell a dramatic story of catastrophe or lost technology. They tell a quieter story of endurance, of intention without explanation. And perhaps that is more unsettling, because we prefer mysteries that resolve into singular events. An explosion, a disappearance, a lost device. Karnak resists such framing. It is not one event. It is accumulation, stone after stone, generation after generation, placed with purpose, maintained without inscription, left without instruction. Some scholars argue that the true function may never be known definitively, and that may be acceptable. Archaeology often reconstructs patterns without complete narratives. What we know is that the stones were deliberately erected, that they align in structured formations, that they required coordinated effort, and that they held meaning for the people who built them. What that meaning was remains silent. As evening light casts long shadows across the alignments, the stones appear almost animate. Rows stretch toward horizon, silhouettes against fading sky. Wind continues its passage, and visitors walk quietly between ancient formations. 7 millennia later, the stones still command presence, not because we understand them, but because we do not. And in that uncertainty lies their power. They remind us that human societies have always expressed belief and identity in ways that transcend simple explanation, that monumental effort does not require written justification, and that sometimes the most profound mysteries are not those that shock us, but those that endure patiently, waiting without answer. The Karnak stones stand as they have for thousands of years, silent, aligned, and still asking, what were we meant to see? The lost colony of Roanoke, the word carved into silence in the late 16th century, before Jamestown, before Plymouth Rock, before permanent English settlement took root in North America, a small group of men, women, and children arrived on the shores of what is now North Carolina. They carried hope. They carried supplies. They carried the ambition of an empire expanding across oceans, and within 3 years they vanished. The settlement was established on Roanoke Island in 1587 under the leadership of John White. White's daughter gave birth there to Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the Americas. The colony was fragile from the start. Relations with some indigenous tribes were strained, supplies were limited, and the settlers depended heavily on resupply missions from England. Soon after arrival, White sailed back to England to secure provisions. He intended to return quickly. But war intervened. England was preparing to face the Spanish Armada. Ships were diverted for defense. White was delayed nearly 3 years. When he finally returned in 1590, he found something impossible. The settlement was empty. No bodies, no signs of battle, no remains of struggle. The houses had been dismantled carefully, fences removed, structures taken down with deliberation, not destroyed, and carved into a wooden post was a single word: Sie roten. 1. On a nearby tree, only 3 letters remained: zero. There was no distress signal, no cross carved to indicate danger, a sign the colonists had agreed upon if forced departure occurred under threat. Instead, it appeared organized, intentional, as if the colony had simply relocated. Croatoan was the name of a nearby island, now known as Hatteras Island, and also the name of an indigenous tribe friendly to the English settlers. White believed his colony had moved there. He attempted to sail south to investigate, but storms intervened. His ship was damaged. He was forced to return to England without confirmation, and the fate of the Roanoke settlers entered history as one of America's earliest mysteries. What happened to approximately 115 men, women, and children? Over centuries, theories multiplied. The most straightforward explanation suggests assimilation. The colonists, facing supply shortages and isolation, may have integrated with the Croatoan tribe or other indigenous communities. Some later reports from European explorers described Native American tribes with gray eyes or English-like features. Certain tribes reportedly spoke words resembling English, but such accounts are anecdotal. No definitive archaeological evidence confirms large-scale assimilation. Excavations on Hatteras Island have uncovered European artifacts, including 16th-century English pottery and metal objects. But these could represent trade rather than relocation. Some researchers propose that the colonists attempted to move inland toward the Chesapeake Bay, their originally intended settlement location. Maps from John White's time contain hidden symbols that some interpret as indicating a planned secondary site. Recent archaeological digs at sites along the Albemarle Sound have uncovered fragments of English ceramics from the late 1500s. But again, the evidence is fragmentary, not conclusive. Another theory suggests conflict. Relations between settlers and neighboring tribes were tense at times. Perhaps violence occurred, perhaps the colonists were killed or dispersed, but no mass grave has been found, no battlefield remains discovered, and indigenous oral traditions do not clearly describe such an event. Disease is another possibility. European settlers often suffered from malnutrition and illness in unfamiliar climates. A weakened colony might have dwindled quietly. Survivors could have sought refuge elsewhere. The lack of skeletal remains complicates this theory. Archaeological evidence of complete disappearance remains elusive. The mystery deepens because Roanoke was not a lost expedition in a remote wilderness. It was a coastal settlement with access to nearby communities. If the colonists had perished violently or catastrophically, some trace might remain. Instead, the site appears orderly. The words Groton carved deliberately, as if meant to communicate. Perhaps the colonists intended the carving as a message for White, explaining their destination. Perhaps they expected him to follow, and perhaps he nearly did. Weather, however, disrupted that attempt. History turned on wind and waves. What if White had reached Croatoan Island? Would the mystery exist today? It is possible that the Roanoke settlers survived, blending into indigenous communities over time. If so, their descendants may have become part of tribal populations. Records from the 17th century describe the Croatoan tribe as having some European features, but colonial narratives often exaggerated such claims. Without DNA evidence linking modern descendants conclusively to Roanoke settlers, the theory remains plausible but unproven. There is also the human dimension. Imagine standing on Roanoke Island in 1587, food supplies diminishing, uncertain whether ships would return, relations with neighboring tribes shifting, the Atlantic stretching vast and empty to the east, 3 years without news from England. Relocation may have seemed necessary. Moving inland or south to friendlier territory could have been survival strategy. The careful dismantling of homes suggests planning, taking materials to rebuild elsewhere. No signs of rushed departure, no evidence of panic. The colonists likely made a decision, collectively or under leadership, and then walked away from the settlement that history remembers. Perhaps they lived out their lives integrated into local communities. Perhaps their English identity dissolved gradually. Perhaps their children spoke new languages, And perhaps within a generation, the memory of Roanoke became a story rather than lived reality. What makes the Roanoke mystery powerful is not evidence of catastrophe, but absence of closure. There was no dramatic shipwreck, no recorded massacre, no visible ruins beyond empty foundations, just an abandoned colony and a carved word. Over time, Roanoke became a symbol of uncertainty in early American colonization. It stands as a reminder that expansion was fragile, that settlement did not guarantee permanence, that even official ventures backed by English crown could dissolve quietly. The word "See Roto-Ran" remained central. Some historians argue that White misinterpreted what he saw. Perhaps additional carvings existed, but weathered away. Perhaps the colonists left more clues that time erased. Wood decays, inscriptions fade, evidence disappears. 4 centuries have passed. Storms have reshaped coastlines. Archaeological layers have shifted. What once was visible may now lie beneath sand or water. And yet, interest endures. Roanoke persists in cultural memory because it represents possibility rather than certainty. It invites speculation without offering resolution. Were they absorbed peacefully into indigenous life? Did they attempt a dangerous inland migration? Did famine or disease claim them gradually? Or did something else occur, undocumented, unrecorded, forgotten? Modern archaeological efforts continue cautiously. Excavations search for domestic remains, for pottery shards, for settlement patterns consistent with English design. But until definitive evidence emerges, Roanoke remains suspended between explanation and legend. Standing today on Roanoke Island, the land appears serene. Trees sway gently. The shoreline curves quietly. There is no sign of vanished colony, no dramatic ruins, just reconstructed buildings marking where settlers once stood. History feels thin here, fragile, because it depends on what remains, and what remains is a carved word. Croton, 3 syllables echoing across centuries, perhaps not a warning, not a curse, not a sign of doom, but a simple message of relocation, and if so, the mystery may not be disappearance, but misunderstanding. The colonists may not have vanished at all. They may have simply moved beyond the narrow frame of English record-keeping, but until proof surfaces, Roanoke remains a question carved into wood. A settlement that left no bodies, no battle, no explanation, just absence, and sometimes absence speaks louder than ruins. The Taos Hume, the sound no one else can hear in the high desert of northern New Mexico, where mountains frame the horizon and adobe buildings reflect the sun in muted tones. A sound began to trouble residents in the early 1990s. It was not loud, it was not explosive, it did not shake windows or rattle doors. It was low, steady, persistent, a faint hum. The town of Taos is known for art, history, and quiet desert nights. But for a small percentage of residents, silence no longer felt complete. They described a droning noise, like a diesel engine idling in the distance, a constant vibration that seemed to emanate from nowhere. It was most noticeable indoors, more audible at night, and it could not be easily recorded. The phenomenon became known as the Taos hum. Unlike many mysteries tied to ancient artifacts or lost civilizations, this one unfolded in modern time. Residents contacted local authorities, community meetings were held. Researchers from Los Alamos National Laboratory were invited to investigate. Equipment was installed to detect low-frequency sound waves, yet objective measurements often failed to capture anything unusual, and that deepened the mystery. Because those who heard it insisted it was real, not imagined, not psychological. The hum reportedly affected about 2% of Taos residents. This percentage aligns with studies suggesting that only a small portion of people are sensitive to certain low-frequency sounds. Some described insomnia, headaches, anxiety. Others reported feeling vibrations through walls and floors. The sound was described as mechanical, repetitive, unceasing. One of the earliest formal investigations occurred in 1993. Scientists measured background noise levels, electromagnetic fields, and seismic activity. They found typical environmental noise, traffic, distant machinery, natural wind, but nothing that conclusively explained a persistent low-frequency hum. So what could cause a sound heard by some, but not others? One explanation points to infrasound, sound waves below the threshold of human hearing. Infrasound can be produced by natural sources like wind interacting with terrain, ocean waves, or distant thunderstorms. It can also originate from industrial machinery. Although inaudible, infrasound can create sensations of pressure or vibration. But Taos does not sit near heavy industry. The region is relatively rural, and infrasound sensors did not detect consistent anomalous readings during investigations. Another possibility is internal physiological noise. The human ear can generate its own sounds, a condition known as spontaneous otoacoustic emissions. In some cases, individuals perceive low-frequency hums that originate from within their auditory system. This might explain why only certain people hear it, but for many affected residents, the sound seemed external. They reported moving between rooms and noticing changes in intensity. They described stepping outside and hearing it fade, then returning indoors and hearing it again. This suggests environmental interaction. Some researchers propose that buildings themselves amplify low-frequency vibrations. Modern structures contain HVAC systems, plumbing, and electrical components that can generate subtle hums. When combined with certain acoustic conditions, these vibrations may resonate at frequencies detectable only to sensitive individuals. But Taos residents reported hearing the hum in different buildings across town. Not confined to a single structure, the mystery also intersects with geography. Taos lies near mountainous terrain. Wind flowing across ridges can produce low-frequency resonance. Natural topography can amplify certain sounds. But again, measurements fail to capture consistent acoustic anomalies. What makes the Taos hum particularly intriguing is that it is not unique. Similar hum phenomena have been reported in other parts of the world. The Bristol hum in England, the Windsor hum in Canada. In some cases, industrial sources were eventually identified. In others, no definitive cause was found. The Taos hum remains among the most studied and least explained. The psychological dimension cannot be ignored. Once awareness spreads within a community, suggestion can heighten sensitivity. But dismissing the hum as purely psychological fails to account for consistent reports across individuals who had no prior contact. Some residents described hearing it before learning others experienced the same thing. That detail complicates mass suggestion theory. The hum is described as low frequency between 30 and 80 Hz. At these frequencies, sound waves can travel long distances and penetrate walls easily. They are felt as much as heard, but pinpointing source becomes difficult. Humans are less capable of localizing low-frequency sound directionally, which means even if the source were identifiable, it might appear to come from everywhere. Some have speculated about military operations at nearby facilities, but no evidence supports active low-frequency emission linked to government testing. Others suggest underground geological activity. Seismic microtremors can produce subtle vibrations, yet Taos does not sit atop highly active fault lines, and seismic monitoring did not correlate clearly with reports. Perhaps the most unsettling possibility is that the hum represents a convergence of minor factors, small mechanical noises, wind patterns, building resonance, individual auditory sensitivity, together creating an experience real to those who perceive it, but difficult to isolate scientifically. The human brain is adept at pattern recognition. In quiet environments, subtle background frequencies become more noticeable, especially at night. In rural areas with minimal ambient noise, internal and external sounds may feel amplified. Yet this explanation feels incomplete to those affected, because the hum is described not as faint background noise but as intrusive, persistent, almost invasive. The Taos hum raises broader questions about perception. How many phenomena exist at edges of human sensory thresholds? How often do individuals experience stimuli others cannot detect? History is filled with cases where minority perception was dismissed, only to be later validated by improved instruments. But it is also filled with examples where subjective experience lacked objective basis. The hum occupies this uncertain territory. Standing in Taos at night when desert air cools rapidly and stars stretch across vast sky, one might expect silence, and for most residents, silence prevails. But for some, the hum continues. Low, mechanical, invisible. It is not catastrophic, it does not destroy, it does not leave physical traces, but it alters experience of place. Sleep becomes fragile, concentration difficult, and uncertainty lingers. What causes a sound that instruments struggle to capture? What does it mean when only certain individuals perceive it? The Tao's hue may eventually be explained through improved acoustic modeling or physiological research, or it may remain one of those subtle anomalies that defy clean resolution. Unlike ancient mysteries carved in stone or buried in soil, this one resides in sensation, in hearing, in experience. It is not visible, not tangible, and perhaps that makes it more unsettling. Because it exists at boundary between objective world and subjective perception. Some residents eventually moved away, seeking relief. Others learned to ignore it. For many, it faded over time, but reports still surface occasionally, quiet reminders that somewhere between desert wind and human ear, something hums, and perhaps the Tao's hum reminds us that mystery does not always require ancient ruins or lost artifacts. Sometimes it exists in the ordinary, in low frequencies we cannot fully measure, in experiences shared by few, and in the uneasy space where science searches but does not yet conclude. When night falls over Taos and mountains silhouette against fading light, silence appears complete. But for some, beneath that silence, a steady tone continues. Unseen, unrecorded, unresolved, and still humming. The Black Knight satellite, signal from the sky, long before humans placed satellites into orbit, before rockets carved fire trails across the atmosphere, and before global positioning systems mapped the world in invisible grids, a strange story began to circulate. It was a story of something already up there, watching. Silent, ancient. The legend of the Black Knight satellite claims that an unidentified object has been orbiting Earth for thousands of years, possibly 13,000. According to the narrative, this object predates human spaceflight. Some versions suggest it is extraterrestrial. Others claim it is an ancient alien probe monitoring humanity. The origins of the story stretch back over a century. In 1899, inventor Nikola Tesla reported detecting unusual radio signals while experimenting in Colorado Springs. He believed he may have intercepted communication from intelligent life beyond Earth. Though Tesla's observations were groundbreaking in radio experimentation, later analysis suggests the signals were likely natural atmospheric interference or early terrestrial radio sources. Still, his comments planted seeds. In the 1920s, amateur radio operators reported mysterious, long-delayed echoes, signals that seemed to bounce back seconds after transmission. These so-called long-delay echoes puzzled researchers. Speculation emerged that an object in orbit might be reflecting signals, but at the time, human technology had not yet placed anything into space. The idea of artificial satellites existed only in theory. By the 1950s, during the early days of the Cold War, radar systems occasionally detected unidentified objects in orbit. Newspapers reported sightings of mystery satellites before the launch of Sputnik 1 by the Soviet Union. Some claimed that both American and Soviet tracking stations had picked up unidentified orbiting objects. But declassified records later suggested these detections were misinterpretations of space debris, lost rocket components, or experimental equipment. Then came the image. In 1998, during the STS-88 space shuttle mission, the first assembly flight for the International Space Station, astronauts photographed a dark, oddly shaped object floating against the backdrop of Earth. The image circulated widely. The object appeared angular, metallic, unfamiliar. For some, it was visual proof. The Black Knight had been captured on camera. NASA, however, provided a far simpler explanation. The object was a thermal blanket, insulation material that had detached from the shuttle during spacewalk operations. Its unusual shape resulted from crumpling in microgravity. But for those already invested in the Black Knight legend, the explanation felt insufficient. The object looked structured, solid, purposeful, and so the myth evolved. According to some narratives, the Black Knight has been orbiting Earth for millennia, transmitting signals, monitoring human activity, and possibly sending data back to unknown origins. It is said to occupy polar orbit, circling Earth from pole to pole rather than along equatorial lines. Polar orbits allow complete global coverage over time. Modern Earth-observing satellites use similar paths. But here lies a key question. If such an object had orbited Earth for thousands of years, how would it remain stable? Orbital decay is inevitable. Without propulsion or periodic adjustment, Objects in low Earth orbit gradually lose altitude due to atmospheric drag. They eventually burn up during re-entry. A satellite orbiting for 13,000 years without maintenance contradicts known orbital mechanics. Even higher altitude objects experience gravitational perturbations. Space is not static. Objects shift. Paths decay. The physics do not support ancient stable orbit without active systems. Furthermore, modern space tracking networks monitor thousands of objects in orbit, including debris as small as a few centimeters. No unaccounted large object matching Black Knight descriptions has been confirmed. Still, the legend persists. Why? Because the idea resonates with deeper themes. The notion that humanity is being watched from above, that signals from the sky predate our understanding, that advanced civilizations may have placed silent observers long before we launched rockets. The Black Knight story combines historical radio anomalies, early radar confusion, and one compelling photograph into a cohesive myth. It is less about evidence, more about narrative cohesion. The long delay echoes reported in the 1920s, for example, were later studied scientifically. Radio waves can reflect off the ionosphere, space debris, or atmospheric layers under unusual conditions. Time delays may appear dramatic without requiring alien satellites. Tesla's signals were likely natural electromagnetic interference, and radar detections in the 1950s were consistent with space debris and classified military tests. Each piece individually has grounded explanations, but when assembled into a single timeline, they form something more dramatic. Human cognition favors pattern recognition. Separate events become linked. Ambiguities become evidence. Photographs become confirmation. Yet scrutiny often dissolves mystery into physics. Still, the Black Knight legend reveals something meaningful about our relationship with space. Space feels vast, empty, yet strangely intimate. We project onto it, fear it, romanticize it. When early radio operators detected unexplained echoes, they lacked modern atmospheric models. Unknown signals became mysterious rather than measurable. When the space shuttle photographed floating debris, shape replaced context, and shape can mislead. In zero gravity, insulation blankets twist unpredictably, edges fold, surfaces glint. Without scale reference, objects appear unfamiliar. The STS-88 image, once contextualized within mission reports, aligns with routine debris events. But isolated from that context, it invites speculation. The Black Knight myth also reflects transition periods. At the dawn of radio communication, electromagnetic phenomena felt magical. At the dawn of spaceflight, orbital objects felt uncanny. Today, thousands of satellites circle Earth routinely. We track them publicly. Their positions are cataloged. The mystery fades under transparency, and yet the legend remains, because it is not solely about an object, it is about possibility. What if humanity is not first to orbit Earth? What if observers arrived before us? What if signals we once dismissed held deeper meaning? These questions persist in cultural imagination, but scientific investigation demands evidence beyond pattern. To date, no confirmed satellite predating human spaceflight exists. No verified orbital object thousands of years old. No transmissions from ancient probes. The Black Knight remains a story woven from misinterpretation, coincidence, and imagery. Yet perhaps that is precisely why it fascinates. Because it illustrates how modern myths form. Not in ancient deserts, not in medieval manuscripts, but in newspaper headlines, early radio experiments, and shuttle photographs. The Black Knight is a space-age legend, a reflection of our era's anxieties and aspirations. As humanity extends its reach into orbit and beyond, the sky no longer feels unreachable. We populate it with hardware. We send probes to Mars. We transmit signals across billions of kilometers, and perhaps that familiarity makes the idea of something already there more unsettling. Standing beneath night sky, watching satellites move as faint dots of light across stars, one might wonder how many objects orbit overhead at any given moment. Thousands, most cataloged. Some debris, some functional, none confirmed alien. But the sky remains vast, and human curiosity remains restless. The Black Knight satellite may not exist as legend claims, but its endurance tells us something. We are drawn to mysteries that place us within larger narrative. Watched, connected, observed. And in that sense, the Black Knight is less about orbital mechanics and more about imagination. Space will continue to surprise us. New objects will be discovered. Old debris will be photographed, and myths will evolve. But until evidence demonstrates otherwise, the Black Knight remains what it likely always was: a collection of misunderstood signals, stray debris, and one compelling image assembled into story powerful enough to endure. High above Earth, satellites continue their silent arcs. Not ancient, not alien, but human. And perhaps that is extraordinary enough. The Shroud of Turin, the image that should not be there, in a quiet chapel in northern Italy, kept under controlled light and temperature, lies a piece of cloth that has stirred debate for centuries. It is simple linen, faded, fragile, and across its surface is the faint image of a man. This is the Shroud of Turin. For millions of Christians, it is believed to be the burial cloth of Jesus of Nazareth, the fabric that wrapped his body after crucifixion. For others, it is one of the most elaborate religious artifacts ever created. And for scientists, it remains a puzzle suspended between chemistry and faith. The cloth measures approximately 4 meters long and 1.1 meters wide. It bears the faint front and back image of a crucified man, complete with wounds corresponding to Roman execution methods. The image is not painted in obvious strokes. It appears as a discoloration in the fibers themselves. What makes the shroud especially unusual is how the image behaves. In 898, amateur photographer Secondo Pia took the first photograph of the cloth. When he developed the photographic negative, he noticed something extraordinary. The negative revealed a clearer, more detailed face. In other words, the shroud itself appeared to function like a photographic negative centuries before photography existed. This discovery reignited global fascination. How could a medieval artifact produce negative-like imagery? Carbon dating performed in 1988 suggested the cloth originated between 1260 and 1390 CE, firmly within the medieval period. This finding led many to conclude that the shroud was a medieval creation, possibly crafted to inspire devotion during an era when relics were highly valued. But the dating results were not universally accepted. Some researchers argued that the tested samples may have come from a repaired section of the cloth, contaminated by later fibers. They suggested that fire damage, environmental exposure, and centuries of handling could have skewed results. Further testing has been limited due to the cloth's fragility and religious significance. The image itself defies easy classification. Under microscopic analysis, the discoloration affects only the outermost fibers of the linen threads. It does not penetrate deeply into the fabric. There is no evidence of brush strokes, no pigments detectable in concentrations consistent with painting. Some scientists propose that the image could have been created by chemical reactions, perhaps through contact with a heated statue or through application of acidic substances. Others suggest that natural bodily processes during decomposition could produce discoloration, but these theories struggle to replicate the image's resolution and superficial fiber alteration precisely. The shroud's bloodstains add another layer. Tests have indicated the presence of hemoglobin and certain serum proteins. The stains correspond anatomically with crucifixion wounds, wrists, feet, side. They also display patterns consistent with gravity flow from a suspended body. However, critics argue that medieval artists were familiar with crucifixion imagery and could replicate wound placement accurately. Additionally, some chemical analyses have suggested the red coloration may not behave exactly like fresh blood. The shroud has survived fires, most notably in 1532, when molten silver from a reliquary damaged sections of the cloth. The triangular burn marks visible today result from that incident. Restorations were performed in later centuries, which complicates scientific sampling. Beyond chemistry lies theology. For believers, the shroud represents tangible connection to biblical narrative. Its image appears serene, eyes closed, bearded, crowned with thorn-like wounds. The face has become iconic, influencing Christian art globally. But belief alone does not explain image formation. Some researchers have proposed that a burst of radiant energy, possibly ultraviolet radiation, could have imprinted the image. Such hypotheses often intersect with faith-based interpretations of resurrection. However, no controlled experiment has reproduced the shroud's image through natural or artificial radiation precisely. In 1978, the Shroud of Turin Research Project (STURP) conducted extensive testing. They concluded that the image was not painted. They found no evidence of pigment-binding medium typical of medieval art. Yet they stopped short of declaring supernatural origin. Their conclusion described the image as a mystery. The shroud challenges both sides. For skeptics, carbon dating supports medieval origin. For believers, image characteristics suggest something beyond known medieval techniques. The truth may lie in nuances not yet fully understood. The medieval period saw remarkable artistry. Artists experimented with light, shadow, and realism. Could a skilled artisan have developed a method lost to time? Some historians propose that the shroud may have been created using a bas-relief sculpture coated lightly with pigment or chemicals, then pressed onto linen to produce a faint imprint. This could create superficial fiber discoloration without obvious brushstrokes, but replicating the full-body negative image with anatomical accuracy remains challenging. Another possibility is that the cloth is ancient, but the image formed later through unknown environmental reactions. Perhaps centuries of exposure to incense, candle smoke, or burial conditions contributed to chemical transformation. But these theories remain speculative. What makes the shroud compelling is not simply its image, but its persistence. For over 600 years, it has resisted definitive classification. Modern science has advanced enormously. We can analyze DNA fragments, detect microscopic pigments, and date organic materials precisely, and yet the shroud continues to generate debate. Standing before it during public exhibition, which occurs rarely, observers often describe a powerful emotional experience. The image is faint, barely visible from distance, but its presence feels weighty. It is not dramatic, not brightly colored. It invites quiet contemplation. Whether authentic relic or masterful creation, the shroud occupies a unique place in cultural memory. It bridges science and faith in uncomfortable ways. It forces confrontation between measurable data and interpretive meaning. Perhaps the most honest conclusion is that the shroud remains partially unresolved. Carbon dating suggests medieval origin. Image analysis suggests unusual formation. Blood chemistry provides mixed signals, and full access for further testing is unlikely given its fragility. The shroud does not scream mystery, it whispers it. Its image fades under certain light, its fibers show age and wear. It does not move, it does not change, but questions surrounding it continue to evolve. Was it created intentionally to inspire belief? Was it a misunderstood artifact from earlier centuries? Was its image formed through unknown natural processes? Or does it represent something that challenges conventional explanation? History rarely offers certainty when evidence is fragmentary, and the shroud's story spans centuries of devotion, skepticism, analysis, and reverence. In the end, perhaps its significance lies not solely in origin, but in impact. It has inspired art, pilgrimage, study, and debate. It has endured fires and wars. It has been photographed, scanned, examined under microscopes, and still, it remains partly obscured. A face on linen, a body outlined in faint sepia tones, an image that appears negative centuries before photography, and a question that refuses to fade: how was it made? The Piri Reis map, the coastline that shouldn't exist in 1929, during routine cataloging at the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, historians uncovered a fragment of parchment that would ignite one of the most persistent cartographic mysteries of the modern era. It was not a complete map. Only a portion survived, but what remained was enough. The fragment is known today as the Piri Reis map, created in 1513 by the Ottoman admiral and cartographer Piri Reis. At first glance, the map appears typical of early 16th century navigation charts. It depicts parts of Europe, West Africa, and the eastern coastline of South America. But it also seems to show something else: a southern landmass extending beneath South America, a coastline that some have interpreted as Antarctica, and not just Antarctica, but Antarctica without ice. That detail transformed the map from historical artifact into global enigma. Let us begin with what is known. Piri Reis compiled his map using earlier source materials. In inscriptions on the map itself, he describes drawing from multiple charts, including Portuguese and Spanish navigational maps, as well as what he claimed were older sources. He even referenced a map attributed to Christopher Columbus. The early 1500s were an age of rapid exploration. European sailors were charting coastlines with increasing accuracy. It is not surprising that Ottoman cartographers connected through Mediterranean trade networks had access to diverse geographic knowledge. The map fragment clearly shows the western coast of Africa and eastern South America with remarkable detail for its time, but the southern portion has generated controversy. Some researchers in the 20th century argue that the lower section depicts Antarctica's coastline, specifically Queen Maud Land, without ice cover. They suggested that such detail could not have been known in 1513. Antarctica was not officially discovered until 1820, and its ice-covered terrain hides underlying landforms. If the Piri Reis map truly shows Antarctica ice-free, it would imply either 1. Ancient knowledge predating modern civilization. 2. A lost advanced culture capable of global mapping. 3. Or extraterrestrial assistance. These conclusions are dramatic, but they depend heavily on interpretation. Mainstream historians argue that the southern landmass on the map does not represent Antarctica. Instead, it likely reflects distorted or speculative mapping of South America. Early explorers did not yet fully understand the shape of the continent. Maps often extended land southward based on incomplete data. Cartographic projection distortions could exaggerate coastlines. Additionally, some early European maps depicted hypothetical southern continents, Terra Australis, believed necessary to balance the globe geographically. This theoretical landmass appeared on many maps long before Antarctica's discovery. The Piri Reis map may reflect such convention. The claim that the map shows Antarctica ice-free also faces scientific challenges. Geological evidence indicates Antarctica has been ice-covered for millions of years. While ice thickness varies, there is no clear evidence of recent ice-free coastlines within human historical timeframe, which undermines the suggestion of advanced ancient mapping during a temperate Antarctic period. Furthermore, the map fragment does not show full continental detail. It lacks complete Antarctic outline. The supposed Antarctic coastline aligns imperfectly with modern mapping. When researchers overlay the map onto accurate projections, distortions become apparent. What appears striking at first glance becomes less precise under scrutiny. Still, the map retains legitimate intrigue. Its accuracy in representing parts of South America is impressive for 1513. Portuguese explorers had only recently reached Brazil, yet the coastline on the Piri Reis fragment reflects surprisingly detailed knowledge. This suggests access to high-quality source maps, perhaps from Spanish or Portuguese navigators whose charts were otherwise lost. Piri Reis himself wrote that he compiled the map from around 20 different sources. Some were contemporary, some he claimed were ancient. He referenced maps from the time of Alexander the Great, though historians suspect these references may reflect tradition rather than literal ancient documents. The Ottoman Empire in the early 16th century was a hub of intellectual exchange. Scholars translated Greek, Arab, and European works. It is possible that fragments of earlier cartographic knowledge survived indirectly through layered copying. Mapmaking often involved iterative refinement. A chart drawn in one era would be copied, corrected, reinterpreted by another. Details might persist even if original sources were lost. Thus, the Piri Reis map may represent cumulative knowledge rather than singular revelation. But mystery thrives where evidence is incomplete. Only about 1/3 of the original world map survives. The rest is lost. We cannot see how Piri Reis represented the Pacific, Asia, or Africa in full. We cannot verify whether the southern landmass connected differently in missing sections, which leaves space for speculation. The map also contains detailed annotations describing exotic animals and distant peoples. It blends empirical navigation with narrative storytelling, common in Renaissance cartography. Maps were not purely scientific documents, they were artistic, political, and imaginative expressions of worldviews. Cartographers filled unknown regions with conjecture, sometimes monsters, sometimes hypothetical continents, sometimes approximated coastlines. Understanding this context is essential. When modern viewers examine the Piri Reis map, They often project contemporary geographic knowledge backward, but 16th century mapmakers operated with incomplete information and evolving projections. Longitude was particularly difficult to measure accurately until the development of precise marine chronometers centuries later. Distortions were inevitable. Yet even with distortions, the map reveals impressive synthesis. It demonstrates how rapidly global awareness expanded following Columbus's voyages. It also illustrates how interconnected maritime knowledge had become across cultures. Ottoman, Portuguese, Spanish, and Arab navigators contributed to shared cartographic pool. Perhaps the most reasonable explanation is that the Piri Reis map reflects an ambitious compilation, incorporating the best available coastal surveys of its time, blended with speculative southern extensions. But the Antarctica theory persists because it suggests something more dramatic. The idea that ancient mariners charted ice-free continents long before recorded history is compelling. It aligns with broader narratives of lost civilizations, of forgotten knowledge, of suppressed history. Yet extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and thus far, such evidence remains lacking. Still, the map invites wonder. Holding the parchment fragment, one sees delicate lines inked with confidence. One sees coastlines emerging from sea. One sees a 16th century mind grappling with expanding world. The Piri Reis map is not proof of alien cartographers or prehistoric global navigation, but it is proof that history is layered, that knowledge accumulates through exchange, that fragments survive even when originals vanish. Perhaps the true mystery is not Antarctica, but how much early exploration data was lost. Portuguese and Spanish navigators guarded their charts closely. Many were destroyed over time. Some may have circulated privately. Piri Reis might have accessed materials now gone forever. In that sense, the map is both artifact and archive, a window into navigational knowledge otherwise erased. It challenges simplistic narratives of isolated civilizations. It reveals early globalization, and it reminds us that history often survives in fragments, incomplete but evocative. The southern landmass may not be Antarctica, but its ambiguity continues to fuel debate. Standing today in Istanbul, in the quiet halls of Topkapi Palace where the fragment is preserved, the parchment appears modest. It does not glow with hidden revelation. It does not reveal secrets spontaneously, but it carries centuries of speculation within its faded ink, and perhaps that is enough. The Piri Reis map asks not whether Antarctica was known in 1513, but how knowledge travels, how maps evolve, and how easily mystery forms when fragments remain incomplete. It is a reminder that history is rarely linear, that information is copied, lost, reinterpreted, and that sometimes the most enduring mysteries arise not from impossible artifacts, but from misunderstood ones. The coastline on the map may not belong to Antarctica, but the questions it sparked continue to chart their own course. The WOW signal 72 seconds from the stars. On the night of August 15, 1977, in a quiet field in Ohio, a radio telescope was listening to the universe. It was not searching for planets. It was not scanning for images. It was listening, carefully, for patterns hidden within cosmic static. The telescope was known as Big Ear, operated by Ohio State University as part of the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, or SETI. Its purpose was simple in concept, but enormous in ambition: detect radio signals that might indicate intelligent life beyond Earth. Most of what it recorded was noise, cosmic background radiation, natural emissions from stars, interference from Earth. But on that August night, something unusual appeared on a computer printout. Astronomer Jerry R. Emin, reviewing the data days later, noticed a sequence of characters that stood out dramatically from surrounding static. 6EQJ5, he circled it in red pen and wrote one word in the margin: WOW. The signal lasted exactly 72 seconds, the maximum duration the telescope could observe a fixed point as Earth rotated. It was strong, far stronger than background noise, and it appeared to originate from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius. Then it disappeared, and it has never been detected again. To understand why this moment remains mysterious, we need to examine the details. The WOW signal was recorded at a frequency of approximately 1420 MHz. This frequency corresponds to the hydrogen line, the natural emission frequency of neutral hydrogen atoms. Hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe. Because of its universality, many scientists have speculated that if intelligent civilizations were to transmit a deliberate signal, they might choose this frequency as a kind of cosmic calling card. It is a frequency relatively free from natural interference, a quiet channel in the radio spectrum. The wow signal appeared precisely within this band. It was narrowband, meaning it occupied a very specific frequency rather than a broad swath of noise. Natural astrophysical sources typically produce broadband emissions. Narrowband signals often suggest artificial origin. But suggest is not prove. The telescope that night had 2 feed horns, 2 listening beams. If a signal passes through one, it should shortly afterward pass through the other as Earth rotates. But the wow signal appeared in only one beam, which complicates interpretation. If it were a stationary extraterrestrial transmitter, one might expect detection in both beams sequentially, unless the signal was extremely brief, or intermittent, or directional. Attempts to redetect the signal began almost immediately. The Big Ear telescope scanned the same region repeatedly. Other radio observatories joined the search. Nothing. No repeat signal. No faint echo. Just silence. And so the mystery took shape. Was it extraterrestrial communication, or a rare natural phenomenon, or perhaps even human interference? One possibility is that the signal originated from Earth, perhaps from an undisclosed satellite or terrestrial transmitter. But in 1977, geostationary satellites were limited and catalogued. No known satellite was positioned in that direction at the time. Additionally, the frequency used is protected internationally for astronomical research. Human transmitters are prohibited from broadcasting there. Though accidental interference cannot be entirely ruled out, no clear culprit was identified. Another theory suggests that the signal may have come from a passing comet. In recent years, astronomers proposed that hydrogen clouds surrounding certain comets could produce emissions at the hydrogen line frequency. In 2016, comet 266P Christensen was in the vicinity of Sagittarius during the original signal. Researchers suggested that hydrogen emissions from its coma might explain the wow signal. However, critics argue that cometary hydrogen emissions are weak and diffuse, unlikely to produce such a strong narrowband spike. Additionally, cometary emissions are typically continuous rather than brief 72-second bursts. The wow signal's intensity was remarkable. On the printout, the sequence 6EGU-J5 represents signal strength measured over time. Each character corresponds to a numeric intensity value. The peak reached a level far above background noise, about 30 times stronger than average cosmic radiation in that region. Such strength implies either a very powerful transmitter or a relatively nearby source. But nearby where? If extraterrestrial, the source would have to be located within the telescope's narrow field of view, a region containing numerous stars but no specific known candidate at the time. Subsequent searches have examined nearby sun-like stars. None have yielded repeat signals. The fact that the wow signal was never repeated is central to its mystery. SETI research relies on repeatability. One anomalous signal is insufficient for confirmation. The universe is noisy. Instruments glitch. Interference occurs. Without repetition, classification remains uncertain. Yet the wow signal was not random noise. It exhibited characteristics consistent with artificial transmission: strong, narrowband, hydrogen frequency, 72 seconds of clarity, then nothing. Perhaps the source transmitted briefly, perhaps it rotated out of alignment, perhaps it was a beacon not intended to repeat. Or perhaps it was a natural cosmic event not yet fully understood. Radio astronomy has advanced dramatically since 1977. More sensitive instruments scan wider frequency ranges continuously, and still nothing comparable has emerged from that precise location. Some argue that if the signal were extraterrestrial, the likelihood of capturing it during a single narrow observation window is extremely low, unless the transmission was powerful and continuous, which would likely have been detected again. Others suggest that alien civilizations might transmit intermittently, or in patterns we do not yet recognize. The wow signal remains a singular data point, and singular data points resist definitive interpretation. It represents possibility rather than proof. For many, It stands as strongest candidate for extraterrestrial communication ever recorded. For others, it is a cautionary tale about drawing conclusions from incomplete data. Standing beneath night sky, looking toward Sagittarius, the region where our galaxy's center lies, one might feel small. That direction contains billions of stars, billions of potential worlds. The wow signal came from that dense stellar neighborhood. It is humbling to consider. A brief whisper from the heart of the Milky Way. Or perhaps just noise masquerading as meaning. The Big Ear telescope itself was dismantled in 1998 to make way for a golf course. The instrument that captured this signal no longer exists, only the printout remains, paper marked with red pen. Wow! That exclamation captured both excitement and uncertainty. It expressed awe, not conclusion. Decades later, the signal continues to inspire debate. SETI programs continue scanning sky. New arrays like the Allen Telescope Array monitor frequencies continuously. Advanced algorithms analyze patterns beyond human perception. And yet, no confirmed extraterrestrial signal has emerged. The wow signal remains unique, which is precisely why it endures. Because it exists at edge of possibility, not proven, not disproven, just suspended. 72 seconds long. In cosmic time, that is nothing. In human history, it is unforgettable. Perhaps one day a similar signal will repeat, clearer, stronger, undeniable, or perhaps the wow signal will remain singular, a reminder of how vast and uncertain the universe remains. For now, it stands as one of astronomy's most tantalizing anomalies, a narrowband signal at hydrogen frequency, detected once, never again. And somewhere between static and silence, it still echoes quietly, "Are we alone?" The Mary Celeste, the ship found adrift in December of 1872. The Atlantic Ocean was restless but not violent. Winds moved steadily across open water. Trade routes were active. Sailing vessels carried cargo between continents, as they had for generations. And somewhere between the Azores and Portugal, a ship drifted alone. Its sails were partially set, its hull intact, its cargo undisturbed, but its crew was gone. The vessel was the Mary Celeste, a merchant brigantine that had departed New York on November 7, 1872, bound for Genoa, Italy. On board were Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs, his wife Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, and 7 crew members. The cargo consisted of 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol. Nearly a month later, on December 4th, the British ship Dei Gratia spotted the Mary Celeste adrift. Captain David Morehouse of the Dei Gratia found the ship in seaworthy condition. The hull showed no significant damage. There were about 3.5 feet of water in the hold, not unusual for a ship of its kind. The cargo remained largely intact. The crew's personal belongings were undisturbed. Food and water supplies were sufficient. The lifeboat, however, was missing. So were the crew. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no damage from piracy, no storm destruction, just absence. The logbook's last entry was dated November 25, 9 days earlier, placing the ship near the Azores. From that moment onward, the record fell silent. Where had everyone gone? The Mary Celeste became one of the most enduring maritime mysteries in history. Speculation began immediately. Piracy was considered, but pirates would likely have looted valuables. The captain's navigational instruments were missing, but money and jewelry remained. The cargo of alcohol barrels was valuable. None were stolen. Additionally, the ship showed no evidence of violent boarding. Mutiny was another possibility. Perhaps crew members rebelled. But no signs of internal conflict appeared, and abandoning a seaworthy vessel into open ocean would be an extreme act without clear motive. Storm or water spout? But the ship's rigging was largely intact. Damage minimal. Weather records do not indicate severe storms during that period. The orderly condition of the vessel argues against chaotic evacuation. One of the most widely accepted theories involves the cargo. Industrial alcohol is highly volatile. Later examination revealed that 9 barrels were empty. These barrels were made of porous red oak rather than white oak. It is possible that alcohol fumes escaped, accumulating below deck. If fumes ignited briefly, even without leaving burn marks, A sudden explosion-like sound could have startled the crew. In fear of fire, Captain Briggs may have ordered temporary evacuation into the lifeboat tethered to the ship. If the tow line snapped during rough seas, the lifeboat would drift away, leaving the Mary Celeste behind. This theory accounts for missing lifeboat and navigational tools. It also explains why the ship remained intact, as vapor explosions can occur without scorching visible surfaces. Modern experiments have demonstrated that alcohol vapor can produce pressure waves without sustained fire. This scenario is plausible, but it remains unproven. Another theory suggests navigational error. The crew may have believed they were closer to land than they actually were. Fearing sinking due to water and hold, they may have abandoned ship prematurely. However, the amount of water reported was not catastrophic. Experienced captains would not typically abandon ship under such conditions. There were also reports that the ship's chronometer and sextant were missing, suggesting deliberate departure with intention to navigate. But if so, why was no wreckage of lifeboat ever found? The Atlantic is vast. Small boats vanish easily, but complete absence of debris fuels uncertainty. The Mary Celeste's mystery was amplified by media coverage. Sensational newspaper stories exaggerated details. One early fictionalized account by Arthur Conan Doyle, though clearly labeled as fiction, blurred lines between fact and storytelling. He described dramatic scenes of violence and chaos. Readers later confused fiction with reality. This muddied historical clarity. In truth, the case was less dramatic, but perhaps more unsettling for that reason. There was no visible disaster, just emptiness. The ship drifted for days without human presence, its sails shifting with wind, its deck silent. The Dei Gratia crew sailed it to Gibraltar, where an investigation began. Authorities initially suspected fraud, perhaps deliberate abandonment for insurance claims, but no evidence supported conspiracy. Captain Briggs had strong reputation. He was experienced and respected. He traveled with family, unlikely of planning deception. The official inquiry concluded without definitive explanation. And so the Mary Celeste entered legend. Some later theories ventured into supernatural territory. Sea monsters, alien abduction, time portals. These narratives gain traction because absence invites imagination. But none hold evidence. What remains is a pattern of small anomalies: 9 empty barrels, missing lifeboat, water in hold, open hatch, and a captain known for prudence. The explosion scare theory remains strongest. Alcohol fumes could have produced sudden bang without flame. Fearing imminent explosion, Briggs may have ordered evacuation to assess damage. If weather worsened quickly, separation from main ship could have occurred accidentally. In open sea, a small lifeboat stands little chance against shifting currents. Even tethered, strong wind could snap line. And once separated, the Mary Celeste would drift on while the crew vanished into ocean. This explanation is mundane, yet tragic. No piracy, no mutiny, no alien involvement, just misjudgment under uncertainty. But because no bodies were recovered, no wreckage found, the event remains incomplete. The Mary Celeste continued sailing under new captains for years afterward. Its reputation as cursed vessel followed it. Eventually, in 1885, it was deliberately wrecked in an insurance fraud scheme near Haiti. A fittingly ambiguous end to a ship defined by mystery. Standing on a modern sailboat in open Atlantic, one might imagine what it felt like to approach the drifting Mary Celeste. Wind pushing gently, sea steady, boarding ladder lowered, crew climbing aboard, expecting perhaps injured sailors, instead finding silence, half-eaten meals, navigation charts laid out, captain's quarters undisturbed. The psychological impact must have been profound. Abandoning ship is last resort. To leave one seaworthy implies urgent threat, but the threat left no mark. Perhaps that is why the Mary Celeste endures in collective memory, because it presents absence without violence, departure without explanation, a vessel intact, human presence erased. The ocean has always inspired mystery. Its depth conceals evidence. Its storms erase traces. Ships vanish regularly in maritime history, but rarely so neatly. The Mary Celeste was not destroyed. It was left, and that difference defines its legacy. Perhaps the truth lies not in dramatic catastrophe, but in simple fear amplified by circumstance. A loud noise, fumes rising, water seeping, wind increasing, a captain choosing caution, a rope snapping, a lifeboat drifting away, small decisions compounding into disappearance. The Atlantic does not return answers easily. Bodies sink, wood fragments scatter. Time dissolves evidence, and so the Mary Celeste remains one of history's most famous ghost ships, not because of what happened, but because of what did not. No wreckage, no survivors, no confirmed cause, just a ship found adrift, its sails catching wind, its cargo secure, its deck empty, and a question carried by ocean currents ever since: why did they leave? What remains unanswered? And now, we arrive back where we began, not with answers, but with something quieter. Across mountains, oceans, deserts, manuscripts, signals, and silence, we have followed threads that refused to tie themselves neatly together. A ship abandoned without struggle, a sound heard by only a few, a signal from the stars that never returned, a manuscript no one can read, stones aligned long before written history, an image burned faintly into cloth. Each story stands alone. Different continents, different centuries, different circumstances, and yet they share something subtle. They remain open. In a world that prides itself on explanation, these events resist finality. But maybe that is not failure. Maybe it is perspective. Because history is not a perfect record, it is a surviving record. What burns is gone. What sinks is scattered. What fades is forgotten. And what remains, we interpret. Some mysteries will eventually be solved. New technology will clarify old evidence. New documents will surface. New patterns will emerge. Others may never resolve completely, and perhaps that is not something to fear. Perhaps it is something to respect. Mystery reminds us that certainty is temporary, that knowledge is layered, that understanding evolves. It reminds us that we are still discovering, still listening, still looking. And maybe that is the most important thread running through every story we explored. Not that the world is filled with the unexplainable, but that curiosity never truly ends. The Dyatlov Pass still feels cold. The wow signal still echoes in silence. The Nazca lines still stretch across desert. The Mary Celeste still drifts in imagination. And somewhere, right now, something is happening that will one day become another mystery. Because history is not finished. It is unfolding. And one day, future generations may look back at our time and wonder what we failed to notice, what we misunderstood, what we left unresolved. So as the screen fades, let this linger with you. The world is not smaller than we think. It is larger, not because of what we know, but because of what we don't. And that space between knowing and wondering, that is where the rabbit holes begin. If this journey made you pause, if even one of these stories stayed with you, if you felt that quiet shift, that moment where certainty loosened, then you are exactly where curiosity begins. Because curiosity is not about believing everything. It is about questioning carefully. It is about looking deeper. It is about sitting with uncertainty without rushing to fill it. If you want to explore more of these stories, more forgotten corners of history, more quiet mysteries that refuse to disappear, then subscribe. Join this channel, not for answers handed down, but for questions explored thoughtfully. Leave a comment below. Which mystery stayed with you the most? Was it the signal from the stars, the abandoned ship, the unreadable manuscript, the sound only a few can hear? Your perspective matters, because mystery is never experienced the same way twice. And if you know someone who loves history, science, or the unknown, share this with them, because the best conversations begin where certainty ends. Until next time, stay curious, stay thoughtful, and remember, sometimes the most powerful discoveries are not the ones that solve the mystery, but the ones that make us realize how much there still is to learn.